European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, here between now and 1 o'clock. We've got a bumper show today, and we're asking the question very simply, what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday? Because it's a spring statement, a major fiscal event, and we're going to be hearing from her deputy, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. He's coming up in about half an hour. We're also going to hear from the Shadow Chancellor. What do you want me to put to them? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word Talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note, keep them to less than a minute, and if they're pretty short, we might even be able to play them to Darren Jones or to Mel Stride. Keep them as short as you can, but definitely less than a minute if that's okay. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring for a live discussion on the air. 0344 499 1000. Plenty coming up between now and 1 o'clock. We'll talk about the pandemic 5 years on. We'll also talk about Heathrow and what could have gone better. So stay with us here on Talk. Well, let's go straight to the debate desk, and we're asking the question, what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday? Matthew Goodwin-Freeman is here with me. He's a Conservative councillor and political commentator, and Benjamin Butterworth is here too. Good to see you. I think it's our first time together in the studio, Benjamin. Matthew, of course, is always welcome here. Lots to discuss, including Rachel Reeves apparently going to cut £2 billion from the civil service. Unions are warning of massive job losses. We've heard, of course, as well about NHS England and 9,500 job losses there, apparently. Is this the efficiency that the civil service needs, Matthew?
Brilliant, fantastic. We're cutting the unelected quango of civil servants. I'm over the moon and love it. It's fantastic. I love how it's bad when the Tories want to cut the civil servants, but good when Labour do it. But hey-ho, they're doing the right thing and getting rid of lots of the people who none of us know who the heck they are.
Well, they know who they are. Can Labour get away with a bit more,
yes,
Benjamin? You know, the welfare cuts, cutting the civil service. You know, Mel Stride, for example, he's the Shadow Chancellor. I want to talk to him later on about economic issues, but he was the Welfare Secretary as well. I wonder whether, with the welfare changes, Labour's doing stuff that the Conservatives just couldn't get away with.
Yeah, exactly, or at least they couldn't have got away with without a mandate, because these are quite significant changes. I mean, Tory MPs this week are saying Labour is doing all the things we were screaming at the Tory leadership to do, which is quite an extraordinary situation. These cuts would be about 10% of people working in the civil service, so they're significant. But if you put it in context, there's about 120,000 new civil service jobs since just before the pandemic. That is an enormous rise, and I'm pretty sure, I think most people would say that they thought the British state functioned better 10 years ago than it does today. So you do have to ask whether those 120,000 jobs have really been money well spent.
Well, we'll talk to Darren Jones in about 25 minutes' time. If you've got any thoughts on what you think I should ask him, do let me know, as I say. You can also send me questions for Mel Stride. But Rachel Reeves herself, the Chancellor, she has been asked by Sky News this morning about the specific issue of civil service cuts. This is what she said to Sky News this morning.
We've said a 10 to 15%, 15% by the end of the Parliament reduction in admin budgets. In admin budgets. So that includes consultancy, it includes travel budgets, it includes communications budgets. So it doesn't all have to be about people. What I am saying is it will deliver better public services, because I would rather we had people employed by the NHS working in our hospitals rather than in a government department.
Do you believe her, Matthew? Do you think we're going to get better government at the end of this?
The only frustration out of all of that is it's all these cuts by the end of the government. It's no, get it done now. You can look at what we're having in America, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. We need a British DOGE. We could go through that list of jobs in the civil service and say, right, sorry, you're not needed, you're not needed, you're not needed, you're absolutely a waste of money, because it's about £2 billion.
He's a cold fish, isn't he? He's cold fish as well.
It's £2 billion this could say. Well, we've got to be. I'm sorry, but we have to be. Government is not working at the moment, and we've all seen that as much as Labour could carp from the sidelines, as Keir Starmer's lined about the Tories, about being in opposition and how easy government would be, they found it really difficult. And it's good for all of us that we have a strong, good government that delivers for everybody. So this is about £2 billion a year of savings, but it's not going to take effect until the end of this term. Let's get this done quicker. Let's put this on speed track and get these savings as soon as possible.
Do we need a British Doge?
Well, I think you probably have one when you look at the scale of the cuts that they're making. I mean, look, in the US, Elon Musk's government efficiency department has actually started rehiring all sorts of people, because they did it with such haste that they didn't quite know what half the people they were getting rid of was. So I'm not sure it's the best form of government or the most efficient. But £2 billion a year is quite a big saving. The question is, who will those people be? Will it be administrative people?
They say it will. They say it will.
They say it will, but I suspect that when they come to it, they might find it harder than the headline. But also the back off it,
I always hear this in the NHS, for example. I always hear, oh, get rid of the admin staff. Well, the admin staff are the ones that mean the doctors and nurses don't have to do the admin. Exactly. They don't have to send out the letters to say to people, and they're often quite low paid people who are, secretaries, for example, sending out letters about appointments, saying, come in a couple of weeks' time. And sometimes those people are actually really, really important.
But that's where technology can help. And also, all of us have remembered getting a letter 3 weeks after you've had the appointment and having 3 letters about the same appointment, each telling you a different day. That's where the NHS
so AI is going to fix it all.
Well, the NHS has to move into the 21st century, frankly. It can't work as it is at the moment. So we've got to be embracing technology with the NHS, and that will save millions and millions of pounds. The NHS burns through £1 million every 4 minutes. Since we've been on, that's £2 million gone on the NHS already.
Almost as much as your fee for this interview.
You wish.
But it's interesting because Keir Starmer said about 2 weeks ago, he was asked, do you want a smaller state? And he said yes. He thinks the state is too big, too bloated, employs too many people, which is quite an interesting thing for a Labour leader to say. Arguably, it shows you just what a mess the state has got in. Now, lots of those civil service hires were to do with leaving the EU, so maybe there are lots of hang-up jobs from that are no longer necessary now that, that's largely been dealt with. But I think, the truth is that we have a state that is inefficient. Comms officers, communications officers, there's so much money is spent on communicating the mess to try and explain it rather than trying to cut the budgets to fix the mess. And I think it's quite a sensible attitude. The danger is that if it's not as efficient as a civil service, if it fails to be able to get the things ministers want done, well, then they'll have bigger problems and they'll have to explain that at the election.
Do you think the economy is in a better state or a worse state than when Labour came in, Benjamin?
Well, it went up by 0.1 and then it went down by 0.1. So, I mean, technically speaking, it sounds like it's in exactly the same state, size-wise. I think that what we have now is something that basically no other G7 country has, which is that we have a sign of stability. It's very unlikely that you're going to see a change in government or leadership in this parliament. And France can barely put a government together. Germany is fluctuating. The US is incredibly unpredictable. And so I think it's probably good for investment that can come in. And investors, international investors, will be glad of that. And I also respect Rachel Reeves because her job would be a lot easier, especially as a Labour Chancellor, to not be so strict on these fiscal rules she has. And I think it's going to be pretty unpleasant for a year or so, but they are betting the House that this will pay off by the end of the 5 years.
But they're not going to get the growth that they thought they would, are they, Matthew? We're going to see that downgraded this week. It's been downgraded already.
Yep.
They're talking about betting the House. They bet it on 2.5% growth. That's just not going to happen.
No, it's a government for growth, and we're going to have absolutely no growth. Worse than, it's incredible to say it, but worse than the dreadful growth that we had under the Conservatives, which we did not do well enough either. The economy is not in a better state than it was that Labour inherited. They inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. I could rattle through all of the typical Conservative Party stats on how good an inheritance we left. The fact is, people don't feel like the economy is going in the right direction. And that's what happens when you talk down Britain from day dot of getting into government. It was this Labour government coming in on this mandate of change and a big positive future for Britain, and then straight away they slammed the brakes on this, and they've come up with every number under the sun that they want to put for it. They can't justify any of them and can't point to any figures to actually back it up, and neither can any independent body. So that's the problem. I want to see in this spring statement genuine positivity, this turning of the corner and starting to talk up Britain again, because you can't talk Britain down any longer.
But we had genuine positivity, in quotation marks, from Boris Johnson, and it didn't work. It was a lie. It was a myth of sunlit uplands, and I think people were sick of that. You know, there was no situation in which things were going to get better in 1 year or probably 2 years, because that's how deep the problem is. And I think in the end, people will value being told the truth. But there are positive signs because, you know, in terms of people's wages, that is now outstripping inflation, which is
doesn't feel that way to a lot of people,
especially for the junior doctors who got 22%.
Well, good, because junior doctors pay have fallen by a lot more than that in the last 15 years. Right, but hang on, when you've got 7 million people on waiting lists, and that means many of those people aren't going to work because they've got serious health conditions, worsening health conditions, all of that ties in. And I'm afraid that I think they've got the right idea, because ultimately, when you've got such a massive problem in things like the NHS, then you have to raise a considerable amount of money to clear the backlog. Otherwise, it's like the potholes. You're just paving, you know, just covering over the holes and not redoing the runways.
Although, I mean, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, left-wing think tank, talking about the average family could be £1,400 a year worse off by the end of the decade. Now, Rachel Reeves has said already this morning she rejects that. What do you think of that research, Benjamin?
Is that overall in incomes or related to the benefits and welfare changes?
It's everything.
Well, I mean, I hope it isn't the case. Clearly, people's wages, people's salaries are rising faster than inflation, so that should hopefully put it on a different trajectory.
But when you have things like, I mean, yes, inflation overall, as you correctly say, is relatively low, but you have things like council tax that's going up. You see food inflation far higher than the main rate of inflation. I mean, people, it doesn't feel to people as if they're better off, and that's what matters, isn't it?
And that's the point. It depends how people feel. And you know, you said 1,400. I saw somewhere saying it would be about 1,600 this morning. The fact is that this Labour government came into power saying we're going to take £300 off your council tax bills. Do you remember that? Well, actually, council tax bills are going up nearly everywhere in the country. They said we'll take £250 off your energy bills. Actually, energy bills are going up. So it is all about what people feel and adding that money up at the end of the day. So, look, let's hope that this government gets into gear. I mean, every time I seem to come on, it's, you know, saying, well, let's hope that they get things started and get going. We're on what 8th month now?
You do have the optimism of youth.
We've got to be, though. We have to be positive about Britain and back Britain and talk Britain up, regardless of who's in charge.
I do think part of it is a choice that wages have been lower than they needed to be for some years. There's been a culture that somehow raising normal people's wages would cause inflation, when that's not what caused the inflation crisis. And our wages are now 40% lower than the average wage in the US. We are poorer than the poorest US state. In 2007, we were equal. The EU was the size of the US economy in 2007. Something has happened since the financial crash that we failed to fix.
Sharon says, good morning, Peter. I want to hear Rachel Reeves say that she's going to resign, please, before she ruins this country anymore. That's Sharon in Staffordshire. Brian says, what I want to hear from Rachel Thieves is I'm taking early retirement. Dawn says resignation from Rachel Reeves. Dave says has she submitted a resignation. Again, Andy and Woolwich, same thing. Stuart and Ramson, I'd like to hear Rachel Reeves say she doesn't need to cut disability benefit or winter fuel allowance for pensioners or pick on farmers because they've woken and realised to stop funding and homing migrants in hotels all over the country. Morning Peter, says this person, I would like Reeves to do something that would be unusual for a Labour MP. The truth, I would like to ask the panel why third parties don't audit the civil service, which is an interesting point as well. We're going to take a break now. We're going to come back with Matthew and Benjamin, discuss this further and ask your questions as well to Darren Jones and Mel Stride. What do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday at the Spring Statement? 0344 499 1000. Let me know.
Spring Statement, of course, is on Wednesday, and Rachel Reeves has got some very tricky moves to make because, of course, she set these fiscal rules for herself. And if you remember, they said we won't increase, what did they say, income tax, national insurance. They said in national insurance and VAT. Now, obviously, she is, it is believed, going to outline £10 billion of spending cuts in the Spring Statement. She is going to crack down on more than £5 billion of departmental spending growth.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Steve's been in touch and says, from Reeves, I want to hear from now on, I and the Labour Party will take full responsibility for our actions and no longer blame the previous government. If our economy fails to grow within the next 6 months, this government will resign. In my dreams, says Steve. Jackie says, I want to see the billions spent on net zero reversed. Tony says, I'd like to hear from Rachel Reeves that she will be targeting more rich tax dodging people and paying their fair share of taxes, and it would be good to see MPs and ministers taking a cut in their expenses and pay as well. When cuts have to be made, the government should get their own house in order first, says Tony, who is enjoying the show. He says, Stuart says, I would like Rachel Reeves to implement everything they promised they would do before the election, like no council tax rises, growth of 2.5%, all the other things they lied about. British Doge says Gary. Shane says, I'd like to see bigger cuts to civil servants and public sector spending and get back to government spending that's sustainable and a surplus in receipts, running a Keynesian economy since 1997, says Shane. Simon says taxpayers' money is paid into one pot before being distributed to separate accounts. In other words, the government makes a choice as to where the money goes. Can you ask if Rachel Reeves would book an appointment with the Citizens Advice Bureau to learn how to pay the bills before she wastes it on vanity projects? And Leslie says, remember Labour shouts of outrage calling for Dominic Raab to resign and raising his eyebrows, telling civil servants to do their job. Jacob Rees-Mogg certainly did that as well. Well, let's go back to the debate desk with the journalist Benjamin Butterworth and Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, who's a Conservative councillor and political commentator. Let's talk a little bit, actually, not just about what people are talking about there, but also about the migrant crisis, because we have more statistics today in the Express. More than 28,000 people coming to the UK via small boats since the election. Labour says it wants to end asylum hotels. Doesn't seem as if that's happening, Benjamin.
Well, the numbers of people in hotels has gone up in the last few months, and one of the reasons for that is because the processing of asylum claims has got faster. They've hired more people to do that and they've sped up the process, but with that there have been far more appeals. It's gone from about 5,000 to 40,000 appeals, and so those people live in hotels in the meantime, and it takes a long time for appeals to be processed. So you've kind of, you know, it's whack-a-mole, when a different problem crops up when you start to solve another one. I guess the question is, what can the government do to limit how many people can appeal and to limit the time it takes for those people to appeal? And then you've got this other question of the numbers are up 24% on last year. They're actually down on 2022 under the Tories, so they come and go. What is it that would stop people coming? I'm inclined to say that, you know, the world has changed and it's very difficult to stop people turning up on the shores. But if you look to the US, the number of people coming across the southern border is down 82% since Donald Trump took office. The number of deportations is actually about the same as it was with Joe Biden. But clearly there's something to be said for sending out a message of, you know, it's going to be horrible if you come here.
Well, that's the thing. It's the message. The problem is that when people come to this country illegally, they get put in a nice hotel, get everything paid for them, all on the taxpayer's credit card, and then they can stay as long as they want with the likelihood that they're probably going to be approved. What this government's got to do is stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually get on with bringing in...
They have got their immigration and asylum bill. They have got legislation that's going through.
Brilliant. Let's get on with it, because the point is that if the Conservatives brought in that if you come across illegally, you cannot claim asylum. You will be an illegal migrant and you will be deported. That would be the first thing, making it very, very clear to anyone coming across that if you come here illegally, you are not staying. The second thing is actually criminalise this. If you start putting videos out of people coming across illegally, instantly handcuffed, put in the back of police vans and taken to whatever centres we need to, then that will start deterring people, because instead what you see is a coach rocks up on the beach, everyone gets into the coach and off it is to the Premier Inn, or other hotels are obviously available. That's the problem. We have made this so lucrative and easy and almost like a no-win, you know, you're obviously going to be fine when you get here. We've got to start criminalising this and having an active deterrent. And I will just say, I've seen that Labour are planning to bring in this Balkan plan of deporting people to the Balkans to have their process. That is the Rwanda plan, just in a different country.
Well, it's different in that it's
and
people, but it'll be after the asylum process, it's people who have had their asylum claims rejected. So it is a bit different from the Rwanda plan, but it's roughly the same principle. Benjamin, just a final word on this.
Well, I think the law about if you come here illegally you won't get asylum actually was never enacted. It was more of a headline than an actual law that they were going to enforce. It was never used. But I do think there's a serious problem with it, and you know, you have to wonder why it's the case that they can come across. I mean, look, I would just point out that people die in the Channel, hundreds of people die, and some of them don't have the money to pay these people smugglers. They end up going into a life that is essentially slavery once they get into this country. And so if that doesn't put them off, it shows you how desperate they are. And I'm afraid that I think the conclusion has to be that images of them immediately being taken away might be the way to solve it, because then they will know it's not worth the risk, because there isn't the chance of reward.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about Heathrow in the last few days, because we're hearing that the head of Heathrow went to bed, said there was a huge big fire. They were saying this is going to be very, very difficult. Really? This is going to be something that shuts down Heathrow. And he said, oh, the deputy can deal with it. He can do the overnight shift. Should he have gone to bed, Matthew?
Well, I hope the resignation letter's being drafted up as we speak then.
Maybe he's still asleep. Maybe he's having a lie-in.
That's ridiculous, frankly. What I found really interesting about this was the exposing by Richard Tice that Heathrow had actually exchanged its diesel generator backup for a net zero compliant biomass.
It's all Ed
fuel
Miliband's
one.
fault.
I just thought that was incredible, because how can you have Europe's busiest airport relying on something which, if this happens, can't even sustain
but
the
when
energy
there is
for
a
the
crisis,
airport.
the top people should be in charge.
Absolutely.
I mean, do we need to start checking a CV, Benjamin?
Well,
print it off.
You know, the idea that he went to bed, the idea that it lasted so long is a serious issue. And, of course, one of the suggestions in the Telegraph today is that if we'd built the third runway, if we'd cracked on with that, there would have had to have been another generator already, and so it would have been better protected against one fire taking out Europe's busiest airport.
Well, the benefit is they'll have about 40 years till that third runway is built because of how slow planning is
it's
in this
also
country,
insane because you look at the other London airports, and some of them, many of them, have just one runway each.
Yep.
So it's not as even as though they could have absorbed some of the capacity to reduce the damage of an accident like this. You know, I believe in tackling climate change for sure, but you know, the fact that we leave ourselves so vulnerable in such a vital piece of infrastructure. Many people coming to Heathrow aren't even staying in the UK. It's a hub airport for which we get the payment from them coming through London and going on to other places.
Yeah, and they can go to other hub airports.
Exactly.
Schiphol, Charles de Gaulle, they'll be rubbing their hands with glee. Stuart and Ramsden, oh sorry, I've read that one out. Ian in Winchester says, please ask your guests to never talk about GDP growth. It's nonsense. They should only talk about GDP per head. That's gross domestic product, what the country makes. Come on, you know, that is the right measure. And Ian, you're right, actually, because GDP can be as big as you want, but if you increase the size of the population, well, GDP is probably going to go up. Not necessarily, but probably going to go up, whereas it is GDP per head. And GDP per head, what each person makes essentially for the country, is actually very low. And we're not even in the top 20 in the world, actually. Another person says, when Rachel Reeves says people will be better off by the end of the decade, I assume she's excluding pensioners and working people currently losing their jobs, including train drivers and other union members. Ian says, I want to hear from thieves, Rachel Reeves, that she is reversing the inheritance tax on pensions. It is a foul, disgusting tax, taking away children's inheritance. It is really underhand. And David says the establishment is behaving in this way on purpose. The power that's at the top, they want to keep migration and illegals moving from their countries towards the UK by design. This is done to stop them staying in Europe. Barry in North Yorkshire says, I would like Rachel Reeves to announce a major cut to MPs' expenses. They're all literally milking us dry, and Labour are leading the way. Lammy every time he opens his mouth, says Barry in North Yorkshire. Leo in Northern Ireland says, Peter, I just got my salary increase for next year. It's 1%. The letter referenced by the hike in employers' national insurance. Can Benjamin please stop talking about wage increases being higher than inflation? It's only for those who work in the government. Well, it's in other parts of the economy as well.
Yeah, and it's actually higher in the private sector than in the public sector.
Teresa says they make it sound like PIP is easy to get and that there are 1,000 people a day applying for it, but they don't tell you how many are successful. The assessment is brutal and demoralising. Get rid of idiots like Ed Miliband. That would save a fortune. Dave, finally, just before the break, says, I would like to know why the government is ignoring clearly the most obvious and biggest way to save money, which is to stop housing, feeding, clothing and pampering the migrants. They are illegal, which makes them criminals. Yep. Why do we get so well? Why do they get so well taken care of at the expense of our own well-being? Well, thankfully, Matthew and Benjamin are going to stay with me as we go through these interviews with Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He's basically the Deputy Chancellor. Rachel Reeves is number 2. He's going to be with us after the break. We're also going to talk to Mel Stride, who's the Shadow Chancellor. Big economic week. We've got the spring statement, which is coming on Wednesday, and we're asking you the question, what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday? 0344 499 1000. I've got all my stuff together, I've got all my preparation done. Lots of questions have come in. I'm going to put some of my questions, some of your questions to Darren Jones and Mel Stride. That's coming up in a few minutes' time here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we'll speak to Darren Jones very shortly, but I'm delighted that Benjamin and Matthew are still with me. What do you think the questions should be? What are the big unknowns? We've got a load of different people getting in touch. James and Kent saying, why do you keep repeating the lie about the 22 billion black hole when the Office of Budgetary Responsibility have stated it was 9.5 billion? People saying civil service cuts. They're all in the union. How much of a payoff will it cost? Can we expect them to be on strike? There are lots and lots of different people who are pretty angry at the moment, especially on things like PIP as well. What are you picking up? I know you're a councillor as well as a commentator, Matthew. Yeah. What are your constituents saying?
Well, I'm going to play a bit of statement bingo because I want to hear Labour stop blaming the Tories before they start coming up with their own policies.
Don't shout out bingo when he's talking if you don't mind.
No. What I'm expecting is 22 billion black hole, terrible Tory inheritance, 14 years of chaos, crash the economy, and no apology to the farmers, the pensioners, those who are disabled and on PIP, and those who they've slammed with national insurance rises on working people. So I'm going to play a bit of statement bingo, not only with Darren, but also with Rachel from Accounts next week, and we'll see what happens, because this Labour government's got to realise that it's now been in charge for 8 months. They can't keep blaming the previous government. They are the government now. They've got to get on with it, and all we've seen so far is an absolute car crash.
What do you think, Benjamin?
I think it's hard to say they're not getting on with it, given how unpleasant the decisions they're making are. To be objective, there'd be two...
They are doing things. They're just doing a lot of things that a lot of people don't like.
Which they weren't elected to do.
Which comforts me, to be honest, because, you know, you have to pull the plaster off. If I were being objective, there'd be two questions. One would be, how can it be the case that the £20 billion of headroom that the Chancellor had a few months ago has evaporated so quickly? And were they prepared for this in advance? Is this really being drawn up quite rapidly? And the other one would be, is this a Labour government? Because a lot of people that voted for the Labour Party, that waited 14 years for a Labour government, feel like they've got the exact same conclusions they would have had Rishi Sunak stayed in office.
They had one of their... Sorry to jump... They had one of their own MPs at Prime Minister's Questions this week actually say, all of us wanted to see the back of the Conservatives, but actually, was it all worth it now that we've got this? And actually, I applaud that MP for standing up to criticise.
Criticism from people like Richard Bergen as well. OK, yes, obviously on the hard left of the Labour Party as well, on things like welfare payments. I just wonder, as a seasoned observer of the Labour Party, Benjamin, do you see huge rebellions coming, particularly on welfare, or do you think they'll assuage that?
No, I think there's a couple of reasons. You know, the people that were selected, that won these elections as MPs, are very young in many cases. They're very loyal to the moderate wing of the Labour Party, overwhelmingly so. You could count on one hand the number of people that got selected from the left of the party among the more than 200 new MPs. And also, you're at the start of the Parliament, so there's a lot of people that want to achieve their goals of being a minister. They probably won't get elected a second time.
Sit down and shut up.
Exactly. I think that's what you'll get. But they're uncomfortable, there's no doubt about it.
But that's a real shame as well, because they've got to look their constituents in the eye and say, I know I was elected on these promises, but actually I'm going to deliver these. And frankly, that's a real shame, because we need to move away from politicians pulling the party line and actually being good constituency MPs. That's what cuts through.
Yeah, but I do think... I mean,
a lot of them were elected as paper candidates, not expecting to win, for example.
I know I sound like the most Blairite man alive, but there are 3 times as many people deemed not fit for work today compared with 5 years ago. Now, I don't believe that we have tripled the number of people that have conditions that mean they can't do some form of job. And so the argument to the Labour MPs that people like Darren Jones will have been making behind the scenes is that it is the moral thing to do to stop those people failing to achieve anything with their lives, failing to go to work, failing to have the dignity of their own paycheck. You know, it's a Reagan quote.
Since when was that? Sorry, 3 times as many people
3 times as many. You know, that...
since when?
Since before the pandemic.
Okay.
Now, part of that will be the NHS backlog, means that there are legitimately more people, but a big part of that is things like anxiety and depression. And there has to be a point where you say, well, clinically, some of those things are tough, but the number of people claiming benefits on those grounds has risen much faster than the NHS's own figures of the number of people being diagnosed. So there is something going wrong, that somehow it has got easier to access those things on benefits and welfare compared to the actual situation in the country.
Well, a big thing about this as well is the fact, and I've said this time and time again, COVID taught people that when push comes to shove, the government can turn on the taps. And ever since then, the government's never shut them off.
We've got Darren Jones now. He is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Deputy to Rachel Reeves. Darren, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Is Labour, do you feel, as the number 2 to Rachel Reeves at the Treasury, that the economy is in a better place or a worse place than when Labour came to power?
I think it's in a better place because we have a political and economic stability now that we did not have for years in the run-up to the last election. You remember the Conservatives had 2, sometimes 3 budgets a year. Tax rates are going up and down, left, right and centre. Inflation had gone through the roof. They'd lost control of public spending and everyone thought we'd gone completely mad. Evidently, we are in an entirely different world now where we have a very strong majority in the House of Commons. We have clear political and economic stability. And that's an important precondition to be able to get on and then modernise our public services and unlock investment from the private sector to stimulate growth in the UK economy.
You mentioned growth there, and growth is something that has eluded you, and your plans were essentially based on 2.5% growth. It looks as if that is just not going to happen over the course of this Parliament, and indeed the Office of Budgetary Responsibility may well downgrade growth, we're told this week, to 1%, but we'll see what happens there. Surely you have to have a major rethink about where the money actually comes from.
We don't have to have a rethink because we do want to stimulate more growth in the economy. That is the sustainable path.
But you haven't done that so far.
Adequate funding for public services. Well, we've been in for 8 or 9 months and we've got more to do. As the Chancellor has said, she's not happy with the growth figures. None of us are. We want them to be better. And that's why we're absolutely focused on making sure that we take the decisions where government is required to do so to enable the private sector to unlock investment and to get growth back into the economy, as well as working with our trading partners and allies around the world as far as it relates to export. So these things are not easy. You can't just flick a switch. If it could do that, the Conservatives would have done it. And after 14 years of failure from that lot, it's going to take us a bit of time to turn it around. But as I say, the economic and political stability that we have brought to this country is an important precondition for that, which has been welcomed by investors and businesses who are increasingly seeing the UK as a strong bet in a world that's changing quite rapidly, in a country that has lots going for it, where we can be even better in the future.
Talking to many of the viewers and listeners of this station, I get the sense that people want a bit more in their pockets, but it could be argued, and I think it's true, that this government is perhaps about a bit less. Pensioners, thanks to the winter fuel allowance cuts, are getting a bit less. Employers, after national insurance and living wage changes, are getting a bit less. Disabled people, after the benefits reforms, are getting a bit less. Foreign aid, a bit less. Ukraine, a lot more. What is this government about in economic terms, and when are you going to make people feel as if they have a bit more money in their pockets?
So our first priority in the Prime Minister's plan for change, these are the things that the Prime Minister said the public should hold us to account for by the time of the next election, is to make sure that people have got more money in their pocket at the end of each month. It's what we call real household disposable income in the Treasury. That's why we've protected people's pay slips in the last budget. People are not paying more income tax or national insurance in their pay slips. They're not paying more on VAT in the shops, especially as we still struggle with the cost of living crisis. But we've increased the national living wage for the lowest earning. We're increasing the triple lock amount of money that's coming through to pensioners, and inflation is coming down and is more stable than it has been in the past. So all of these things are measures to try to tackle the cost of living crisis, to bring stability back to the economy, and support people's incomes to grow. In fact, it's the first time in many months that wages have been going up quicker than the cost of the goods and services that we pay for. That is a good start, but yes, we've got more to do, and we will be holding ourselves to account and expect the public to hold us to account for how much money they've got in their pocket at the end of this Parliament when we go into the next general election.
Well, one member of the public who has got in touch with us is Jill in Cheshire, and she says, "Morning, Peter. Can you ask Darren Jones why, when he insisted older people should not have to bear the brunt of efforts to balance the books, as a female pensioner, I have lost the winter fuel allowance. I've been dismissed for compensation as a WASPy woman. I'm dealing with the increase in council tax, fuel prices for home and fuel, food, in fact, pretty much everything. Please ask him not to repeat the 22 billion black hole, as I'm pretty sure has increased significantly since Labour came to power. Many thanks, have a good day." What would you say to Jill?
The triple lock was an important promise that we made at the election. You know, the Conservatives have said that they're reviewing whether that's something that they continue to support. Pensioners are the only group of people in our country who get the protection from prices in the payments that they get through their pension. And actually, if you compare the amount of money that pensioners get in uplifts to their pension to, for example, a small family with maybe one parent in work who might be in receipt of universal credit, pensioners are getting hundreds of pounds more than those other people. So the triple lock is an expensive commitment nationally. We've got more pensioners because we're an ageing population, but we recognise that pensioners can't change their income easily. They've worked, they've contributed to the system, and we want to support them, and that's why we have honoured that triple lock promise, and will continue to do so.
You and Rachel Reeves are talking today about cutting the bill for the civil service, perhaps by as much as 10%. I wonder if you really want to cut government waste, if that's really a priority of this government, why the government has set up so many quangos since you came to power, over 24.
Well, we are committed to cutting waste and improving the productivity of our public services. That's why today we've announced the fact that the cost, the administrative budget, the back office costs of running these services will be coming down in the years ahead, and we'll announce more later in the week about how we're going to be investing up front to support that transformation of public services. But ultimately, we need to reduce the cost of the state and improve the outcomes that people get from public services. That's a big agenda of public service reform that we are very much up for, and that does include, to your question on quangos and arm's length bodies and all of these types of things, our commitment to reducing that number.
But you've increased it. You've increased it in the last 8 months.
We've set up some new ones in order to align with our priorities for this Parliament, but we've also closed some, and we're going to be closing more.
How many have you closed?
Because we do think that there are. I think we've closed 3 or 4.
Okay, so you set up 27, but you've closed.
NHS England.
Okay, NHS England, obviously massive quango. Absolutely take that point, but you've set up 27 and you've closed 3. I mean, there's a lot more to do, is there not?
There's some more to come, but of course the key thing here is how much does each of those quangos cost, and how much can you save? So if we can make a huge amount of saving from closing NHS England, and that means you can pay for 2 or 3 smaller bodies that are important for delivering on our priorities and still make a savings, then that's totally fine with me.
Let me ask you about illegal immigration. Labour says it wants to make sure that they smash the gangs, but since the start of this year there have been over 5,000 people who have come over on small boats to this country. There are clearly massive backlogs, and what a lot of our viewers and listeners see are people staying in hotels that they perhaps couldn't afford to go there for Sunday lunch, or maybe go once a year for a special occasion or something like that. But actually the number of people in a hotel accommodation has gone up under Labour. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to tackle that problem?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we need an effective deterrent to illegal asylum seekers coming to the UK. And quite frankly, I think we're doing that already. We've already returned over 19,000 asylum seekers who did not have a right to be here, whilst of course fairly processing those asylum seekers that we do want to support in line with our human rights obligations. And this was the key thing. Under the last government, they weren't really sending anybody home. They were just putting them in a hotel and then they just seemed to stay there. We've said that if you don't qualify for asylum, you do need to go home, and we're going to make sure that you go home, and that's a much better deterrent. 19,000 people have gone back in the last 8 to 9 months. If you compare that with the Rwanda scheme under the Conservatives, that was only going to house 300 people. So we're not really into this idea of gimmicks in the same way we've had in the past. We just need an effective asylum system with strong borders, and that's what we're getting on and delivering.
Final question. Ukraine is a huge issue. Rachel Reeves said in the budget that £3 billion would be given to Ukraine this year and indeed every year. I mean, a number of our viewers and listeners very sceptical that Keir Starmer perhaps cares more about the borders of Ukraine than the borders of this country. Can you reassure them?
No, that's not true, and these are two separate issues. I mean, it's right that we are taking measures to get a grip of our borders in the UK, which was left essentially open under the last Conservative government, which is why the whole system got out of control, whether it's the flow of people coming into the UK, the number of people hanging around in hotels, the backlogs in the decision-making process, the cost to the state, all of that was completely unacceptable. We're getting that back on track. But equally, security in Europe is important to us, because if we lose peace and the status quo, the risk to the UK, the risk to the global economy as a consequence of increased conflict around the world is real. And that's why we have to get behind our allies, invest in our defence capabilities, and make sure that whether it's President Putin or anyone else, they don't feel in any way emboldened about their illegal invasions, and know that we in the United Kingdom and with our allies around the world are going to push back strongly on that, and we're going to be in a strong position with strong capabilities, both in terms of hard power and soft power, to make sure that other countries around the world play by the rules.
Darren Jones, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, thank you for joining us on Talk this morning. In just a few minutes, we'll hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. Stay tuned for that.
Spring statement, of course, is on Wednesday, and Rachel Reeves has got some very tricky moves to make because, of course, she set these fiscal rules for herself. And if you remember, they said we won't increase, what did they say, income tax, national insurance. They said in national insurance and VAT. Now, obviously, it is believed, going to outline £10 billion of spending cuts in the spring statement. She is going to crack down on more than £5 billion of departmental spending growth.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's go straight to Mel Stride, who's the Shadow Chancellor. Good morning, Mel.
Good morning, Peter.
Labour is doing major things on welfare. It is really cutting the welfare bill by something like £5 billion. You were the Work and Pensions Secretary in the Conservative government. Are they braver than you?
No, when I was Work and Pensions Secretary, I saved £5 billion across the forecast period by reforms to the work capability assessment. That the OBR scored. It's still in the scorecard, and it the OBR said would see 450,000 fewer people going on to long-term sickness and disability benefits. I'd also consulted on PIP, personal independence payments reform, when I was Secretary of State, and we went into the last election with a clear plan for saving £12 billion a year from the welfare budget. What this government has done, Peter, is to basically, they had no mention of PIP at all, for example, in their manifesto. When they got elected, they pussyfooted around welfare reform because it was all deeply divisive amongst Labour MPs, and then when Rachel Reeves suddenly discovered she was really running out of money entirely, they had to scamper around at the last minute and cobble something together, and that's what you've seen here. Now, that doesn't either, firstly, do the right thing by the taxpayer in getting the right level of savings, and secondly, it doesn't really do the right thing for what are some very vulnerable people up and down the country who will get caught up in the proposal that they're putting forward. So I do think we were in a position to say we have a track record and we would have done things differently and we could have made greater savings.
But Darren Jones, who I've just spoken to, in his view anyway, he says Labour have brought economic stability and indeed political stability after the chopping and changing of the last few years of the Conservative government. He's right, isn't he?
Not at all. I mean, what the Labour government said as we went into the general election, what Rachel Reeves said when she became Chancellor, was that she would create growth. Now, we've seen what their economic policy has done. They got into office, they talked down the economy, they had this notion of this imaginary black hole that they keep talking about. They talked the economy down, they taxed businesses to the tune of 25 billion a year on national insurance. They went and borrowed and spent like it was the 1970s, which is an inflationary pressure. That's led to inflation being higher than it would otherwise have been, interest rates higher as a consequence. That's meant higher mortgage costs, higher cost of business, and of course a higher cost of servicing our national debt, which they have added to very considerably. That servicing cost now in excess of £100 billion a year. That's twice roughly what we spend on defence, and that's not going in to support better public services. That's just simply money that's going down the drain. So no, I don't, if that's stability, then I think they've got a lot of questions to answer, and that's why we're going to have an emergency budget next Wednesday.
It's just a spring statement, you have them too. It's just a spring statement, and you have them as well.
No, it's not, Peter. I don't accept that. The difference between a spring statement should be the Chancellor standing up, presenting the latest OBR forecasts and the data, basically, and giving a commentary on the economy. A fiscal event, a budget, is where you have to make major changes, either to tax or borrowing or spending, or indeed amending your fiscal targets. Now, she's ruled out several of those options, and she will be left probably with just spending. But a big change in spending within the forecast is a major fiscal move, and that is why it's an emergency budget, not a spring statement.
Tell me your thoughts on the fact that the government has said they're going to cut about 10% of the civil service. They're arguing they're going to make significant savings under you. Okay, yes, the pandemic and the lockdowns were there, but there's something like 120,000 extra civil servants. They're cleaning up after you, aren't they, Mel Stride?
So you're right, it went from 365,000 up to 515,000 today, a lot of it due to COVID. In fact, when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, in order to fund our commitments then to increasing the amount we would spend on defence, we made a commitment actually by what was then 2028 to save £2.9 billion in that year. What this government has come forward is to say that they will be looking to save £2 billion, so rather less than we were putting forward when we were back in government. But look, the whole idea of getting towards a smaller state is really important, because we have huge challenges as a country, some of which are geopolitical, some of which are domestic, an increasingly ageing population that we have to support, and so on, and some of which are actually political for the Conservative Party in terms of appealing in particular to lower age groups. All of that needs a dramatically rewired economy, which is why Kemi Badenoch is absolutely right that we need to take the time to think through exactly how we're going to do that, because there are many strands to it. But one of them is absolutely getting the size of government under control and making sure that it's efficient.
Kemi Badenoch, you mentioned there, the leader of your party. We've seen time and time again in many polls that the Conservatives are actually third now. You're no closer to getting back to government than, in fact, you're far behind, actually, in some polls than you were at the election. And we know that next weekend there's going to be a major conference in Birmingham at the NEC for Reform UK. 10,000 people are expected to attend that. The Conservatives in opposition just aren't working, are you?
It takes time, Peter, after a major electoral defeat, and it is pretty much the worst in the history of the Conservative Party. You know, you don't just leap from that suddenly on the back of a few announcements or whatever else right back to the top of the polls. It doesn't work like that. We need to take the time now to regain the trust of the British people, to explain how we're doing the serious thinking, to solve some of the deep challenges that our country has, and some of those are indeed economic, and that's precisely what we're going to do. As to the polls, they will move around, they always do, but look, we're 4.5 years now probably from a general election. We have time to do that work. And if you were interviewing me back in 2019, for example, and I was a socialist politician, heaven forbid, you would be saying you're going to be out of power. You're going to be out of power for a generation, Mr. Stride, aren't you? Because that is your worst defeat since the 1930s. Well, look at what happened. Things can change. So what we've got to do now is concentrate firstly on making sure we're an effective opposition. That's what the country has asked us to do, holding the government to account, as I am on your show right now, and secondly doing that longer term deep thinking so that we come up with the right solutions for our country.
Stride the socialist off to get his Che Guevara t-shirt. I'll let you go. Thank you.
I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think so either. Mel, thank you. Mel Stride there, Shadow Chancellor. Appreciate that. Nicola in Norfolk says, morning, Peter. Good interview with Darren Jones. However, he typifies this government, which is stuffed full of metropolitan elites, pervading the upper echelon of Labour. Condescending, totally disingenuous, full of sound bites, but totally out of touch with the ordinary, decent people of this country. I absolutely despair, says Nicola. George has been in touch and says, if you're a pensioner, you're on the scrap heap. Many don't have a chance to increase their income. Migrants are given priority, having contributed nothing. I'll repeat that, contributed nothing. The lifestyle we benefit from today was built by today's pensioners. Treatment of today's pensioners is more than unfair. It's disgusting, says George. I will, of course, bring you reaction to Mel Stride's interview. In fact, let's start with that, with Benjamin Butterworth. What did you think of what Mel Stride said, first of all?
Well, he's never going to be a motivational speaker. You know, the problem...
You weren't motivated by that?
No, I wasn't. I mean, the problem is, you know, at the end of it, he says about how, well, you're not going to rebound in the polls given how harshly they were kicked out. But he spent the rest of it saying, well, actually, you know, what we did was great and we would have done some stuff better. Yeah. I mean, it's just not convincing. It's not coherent. There's not much to pick up on. And I think that's the problem with the Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch. They don't know what their purpose is. And they're attacking the things Labour does, because that's the nature of opposition. But you also know that they would have done, maybe not the tax rises, but everything else would have been pretty much exactly the same. I was listening to Rishi Sunak's 2-hour podcast interview he did recently, and he was saying that he would have done the welfare cuts too.
Matthew, what did you make of the Darren Jones interview? How's your bingo card?
Well, I think I shall shout bingo, because I got 10 out of 10. It was utterly condescending. No apology for the farmers, the pensioners, the disabled on PIP, national insurance or working people. Instead, people are supposed to already be feeling like there is more money in your pocket. So do you feel that? Do you feel like there's more money in your pocket? No, of course not. Utter waste of time. Typical party politician.
OK, and a quick word on Darren Jones and what the government is doing and what he said is going to happen on Wednesday, Benjamin?
Well, I'm just glad that we've got some stability. You know, these tough decisions would have been there regardless of which party, but one of them spent 14 years, you know, spending money like there was no tomorrow.
Bingo.
And, you know, but it's true. It really is
austerity.
true.
Austerity was not spending money like there was no tomorrow. It was quite the opposite of that.
Well, we didn't have austerity. What we had is the highest taxes, the biggest state, the longest NHS waiting list, the highest migration numbers of any government, and that was under the Conservatives.
I didn't realise Darren was in the room. Gosh.
But it's true. And the thing is, people would go... the Conservatives would be in a better position if they were honest about that.
All right. Thank you both very much, Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, Conservative councillor and political commentator. Great to have you in the studio. And Benjamin Butterworth, first and not the last time we've been in the studio together. Thank you. He is a journalist, and thank you to him for that. What do you think about this? Loads of reaction coming in. We're going to take some calls very, very soon. We're also going to talk a little bit later on about this migration plan and what is actually happening. We're going to talk next about a giant fraud in student loans as well. Another way we're being scammed. This is the front page of the Sunday Times today. Huge story about how various people are coming to this country pretending to be students, basically, on very, very flimsy premises, and then not actually giving the money back ever. Lots of other students, legitimate students, not doing that either. Lots to discuss on that too. We'll get your reaction very soon here on Talk.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'm here until 1 o'clock today. I'm also back during the week. I'm going to be doing Drive on Thursday and Friday between 4 and 7, and the weekend shows next week as well, so plenty of that. Also, the spring statement coming on Wednesday. Lots of coverage of that. I'll be all over that with Julia Hartley-Brewer, with Ian Collins, and indeed with Jeremy Kyle. And we're talking about that today, and we're asking that question. What do you want from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday? What do you want her to say? What do you want her to change? How do you want your life to be better economically? Loads of different people getting in touch, and we'll get to your comments and calls very, very shortly. Big story today as well. It's in the Sunday Times. Revealed the giant fraud in student loans, sham students enrolling simply to access funds. And Bridget Phillips, and the Education Secretary, fears the scale of the financial scandal. We'll come to that in a minute. That's your money, of course, taxpayers' money. Another way we're being taken for a ride. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. We'll talk about the anniversary of COVID as well, and those lockdowns which did so much damage to our country. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call if you want to give me a ring to get your voice on the air. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. You can follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, 0344 499 1000. Same number for WhatsApp text messages, and you can give me a ring on that number as well. One more time, 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. Stay with me here on Talk. Well, let's talk to Nick Hillman. He is director of the Higher Education Policy Institute. Nick, this is a really concerning story, isn't it, that is in the Sunday Times today about really being taken for a ride. A load of people enrolling on degree courses every year to take out a loan with no intention of paying it back. Just take us through this story, Nick.
Yes, good morning. So the Sunday Times have done a big investigation into what's called franchised degrees. So you get a degree from a university that you and I have heard of, but you study at a college or a private provider that we probably haven't heard of. And it looks as if some of the marketing and recruitment and admissions of those private providers may not have been completely above board. Certainly the Secretary of State for Education thinks millions of pounds might have been put at risk because they've been recruiting people onto courses when they may not be able to speak English, when they may have no intention of completing the course, and when they're really just trying to get their hands on the student loan money, which of course can be thousands of pounds a year, both for the education provider and for the student in maintenance support.
Is this just about money, or is it about being able to come to this country as well, maybe getting a student visa? Tell us about that aspect of these things.
Well, it's a very good question, because a lot of the people we are talking about are not native English speakers, and some of them seem to have only a passing acquaintance with English. So you think, well, how can you study adequately for a qualification that's taught in English? But I think the people they're going after are actually non-British citizens who live in Britain already, and they've lived here for long enough that they have right to access student loans. If you were, say, a Chinese person who arrived in the country yesterday, you would now have no right to these student loans. So it does seem to be a particular issue among some Eastern European nationals who've been living here for a while.
There are an awful lot of people who feel they're being taken for a ride in many, many different ways. We're talking about another scam yesterday, another big investigation, this time with the Daily Mail, about crashing into cars and people getting, compensation and money taken off them and their insurance companies for that. With this as well, did this shock you in any way that this is happening, or have student loans always been abused, Nick?
Well, I think there has always been a bit of dodgy behaviour at the margins. And what the Sunday Times' story is certainly implying is that it's on a bigger scale than anybody realised, because the numbers doing this have grown very substantially in a very short period of time. Of course, when you talk about education and money, you're talking about large sums of money, large sums of money. You can have an entitlement to maintenance support of £10,000 a year or so, and your tuition fees, which obviously go to the provider, are another just a little bit over 9,000. So I think where there's money, there's an incentive to track that money down. The difficulty is, you might say, and your listeners might say, well, why not just make all this stuff illegal tomorrow? The challenge is, some franchise provision is very good. So, for example, some midwives are learned through a franchised arrangement between a university and an NHS trust. Some police and crime commissioners are franchisees, training police via a franchised relationship with a university. So it's not quite as easy as just saying, let's just make all this stuff illegal tomorrow.
Just finally, Nick, on the broader issue of student loans, not necessarily scams, but in general, there are a load of people who take quite significant student loans who are just never going to pay those off. Is the taxpayer getting value for money from student loans in general? Because there are lots of people who are maybe not going to university, who are working hard, paying their taxes, thinking, actually, there are a lot of people doing degrees, maybe not the most employment-friendly degrees, maybe they're not worth much more than the paper they're printed on, and actually having a nice time for 3 years, taking out huge student loans, and actually it's the taxpayer that has to fund that.
Well, certainly if there are bad quality courses out there, whether they're being run by a franchised arrangement or through a regular university, then regulators should obviously step in and look at that. But I don't think there is lots and lots of waste in the way that you're suggesting, because the evidence about the benefits of having a degree are huge. You're less likely to be unemployed, even if you're not in highly paid work. Your mental health will be better, your physical health will be better, you'll probably have better parenting skills. So we mustn't judge higher education just on salaries. I mean, nurses, for example, hospitals with more graduate nurses are safer environments for patients. And yet nurses don't always earn enough to pay their student loans back. So we do need to be careful in this area. But clearly, if there's bad quality courses out there, that public debate absolutely should happen. And that's, where the Sunday Times is, I guess, fulfilling a public duty today.
Thank you, Nick. That's Nick Hillman there, Director of the Higher Education Policy Institute. Lots of different reactions to that story and indeed the interviews we did just before the news there with Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and indeed to Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor. Let me know what you think of any of the issues we're talking about this morning. 0344 499 1000. Georgina is in London and has some thoughts on what Darren Jones has been saying. Georgina, you're very welcome to the programme this morning. What would you like to say?
Well, good morning, you little ray of sunshine. I always love seeing you in the morning.
You're very kind.
Well, I'm not so happy about the Labour Party saying they're going to cut, what was it, 2.5 billion off civil service spending. This is not going to happen, and I'll tell you for why. The Labour Party now are trying to make all the right noises for the upcoming May elections. We've got to take into consideration, Peter, that every promise they've made on the manifesto, they have broken. They are not capable of telling the truth. And it's the most vulnerable of our society that has suffered seriously. If they'd have come out when they were doing their political campaign and said, this is what we're going to give you, we are going to take away benefits for the most needy.
They would argue, though, Georgina, wouldn't they? They would say they're just being realistic. They've looked at the books, they've seen what is there, and actually the welfare bill, for example, is far too high. I mean, 70 billion, it's 46 billion, I think, at the moment, 70 billion by the end of the decade, could go up to 100 billion as well. That's just too high. They want to take action now, they would say, Darren Jones would say.
I do agree with the fact that they should take action, but the very fact that they haven't. Now, I'm sitting and listening to all these great Labour people on the television, and I'm listening very hard and trying to be very, very fair with what I'm hearing. Yeah. But I've got to say nothing that what they're saying is adding up. Listen, Peter, we have got a Speaker of the House who's just spent £250,000 on jetting round the world. Now, and no one will bring into account for that because they want to be able to speak in Parliament. Now, you have got a government here that has no testicular fortitude. They are not working on behalf of the people who voted for them, my love. They're working on behalf of themselves. And this is wrong. We need this to change. We want a government who is a voice for the people of Britain. This is what we're desperate for, and we thought we had that. And we haven't. They have let us down astronomically. And to be honest with you, I will never vote Labour. Never. I'm finished. I'm done.
Okay. Have you voted Labour before, Georgina?
Never.
Right, but you're not going to do it again. Listen, thanks for your thoughts, Georgina. You're clearly angry at what's happening this morning. No testicular fortitude. I'm going to use that phrase again, Georgina. Thank you for that. Not just about Chris, the producer. Tracy has been in touch and says, Peter, great show as always. I believe for the first time ever, I agreed with something Benjamin said regarding the Conservatives owning their mistakes, especially about migration. With reference to student loans, we keep getting told that it is the foreign students that keep our universities open. The visa fiddle is huge for student visas, where they then stay and so do their families. And now we're told we, the taxpayer, are covering the bill. One question: why am I so sick of being shafted? Said Tracy in Wakefield. Make foreign students pay half up front, says Tim, who calls himself a very annoyed citizen. And on the interview with Darren Jones, hi Peter, great show, says Massimo from Great Bowden. Why can Labour cabinet ministers never answer a question without mentioning the Conservatives? They never answer a question honestly. They constantly lie about the economy that the Conservatives left behind, and they never seem sincere. I don't trust Labour at all, and the sooner they are out, the better. Tim says, I'm a UK veteran. Let's put this in old terms. Labour are all mouth and no trousers. I love that phrase. I haven't heard it in a while. Let's hear it from Lynn in Glasgow. Lynn, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
Another great show as usual.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of points to make, Peter. Right, I've worked since I was 16 years old. I took the COVID injection in 2021, and ends up with spinal damage because of it. So
I'm so sorry to hear that, Lynn.
I jumped, and I'm not just the only one. There's a lot of people out there that are in the same predicament.
Yeah.
And it's not getting enough attention at all. It's the forgotten COVID people.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, Lynn, and I'm sorry you're going through this. We're actually going to talk to Professor Angus Dalgleish about the lockdown anniversaries and COVID in general. He's a professor of oncology at St George's University, so I will bring up that with him in terms of the vaccine, Lynn, a little bit later on.
It's not what I was going to talk about, but see if you actually look into how many people have applied for the COVID vaccine damage payments.
Yep.
They haven't been paid out. There's not a lot being paid out. But
Okay.
you see the number that have actually applied for it.
I'm just going to write this down, and I promise you I'll ask Angus Dalgleish about that a little bit later on. Yeah.
It just shows how many people actually think there'll be the effect. Anyway, I had to jump through hoops to get my PIP. And I mean hoops to get my PIP. So Rachel Reeves came out this week and saying that's the people that they're going to target. It makes me absolutely sick to my stomach. Now, listening to the two politicians this morning, not one of them could answer a question properly. They only want to do a ping-pong game between the two of them. It's our fault, it's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. And they don't live in the real world, Peter. They don't have a clue what it's like to live in the real world. Now, if Rachel Reeves wants to get the benefits system, the benefits bill down, 38% of the bill on universal credit is paid to people who work.
Yep.
Now, is that not the taxpayer subsidising private companies?
It should always make sense to work, shouldn't it, Lynn? It should always make sense.
It should make sense to work, of course. But it should be the employers paying for the employees, not the taxpayers subsidising it. So if Rachel Reeves wants to get 38% off of a benefits bill, then what you do is you turn around and you say to every single employer, you need to pay whatever amount of money it is an hour, and that will take people above the threshold for universal credit, and therefore the employers are paying for the employees, and they're not government subsidised.
Well, you're making complete sense there, and Lynn, thanks for your points, and thanks for your points on the vaccine injured as well, and I will bring that up a little bit later on with Angus Dalgleish. He's coming up very soon. The Pope has made his first public appearance since his admission to hospital. He's being discharged today. He was in hospital for 5 weeks. I didn't think it was that long. 5 weeks under care. He had double pneumonia, so let's hope the Pope makes a full recovery and is fighting fit. Gordon in Taunton has been in touch and says, please thank Mel Stride for reminding us all just why the Tories were so unceremoniously booted out. They have clearly learned less than nothing and have exposed us to unbridled Labourite mania, says Gordon. Alan says, Darren Jones is spewing nonsense regarding pensioners being kept above rising costs. Lies, lies and more lies. He is in cuckoo land. Our costs are far outstripping the rise in the triple lock increases, says Alan. Darren Jones, I think, would say you're getting more money after the start of the new financial year next month. Pensions are going to go up. He did make that point. Penny in Essex says, Starmer has totally lost control of our borders and only cares about how he looks on the international stage. Trump will not be happy if Starmer overshadows him. And Mark says, 24-carat waffle from that Labour muppet, Peter. You should have played some music instead. Woeful, says Mark. Okay, well, I think it is important to talk to Labour, even if you don't think they're talking a lot of sense. We're going to take more of your calls, including Matt in Cheshire. He's coming up next after the break.
This Starmer said there's a need to tackle the emerging and growing problem raised by new TV drama Adolescence. It was co-written and starring actor Stephen Graham from Kirby and Merseyside. If you haven't seen it, do watch it. It's a really clever piece. It's been penned brilliantly, and it talks basically tells the story of a family who's I need to be careful I don't give it away, but where their lives are blown apart when their teenage son is then arrested for allegedly killing a classmate. I think I haven't given anything away.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Sean in Gloucester, who says, "Good morning, Peter. Always love your show." Thanks, Sean. We thought the Tories were bad with their lies and corruption, but Labour have taken it to a whole new stratosphere. The barefaced lies, their snouts in the trough, the ideology, net zero, etc. Keith Stalin, Rachel from Customer Complaints, Mad Millipede, Mastermind Lammy, the whole lot of them are an absolute disgrace and are bringing utter shame on this country, says Sean in Gloucester. And if you haven't watched David Lammy on Celebrity Mastermind, I implore you, don't do it during this programme, do it after 1 o'clock, but Celebrity Mastermind, David Lammy, put it into YouTube, you will not be disappointed. Kevin in East Sussex says, what a load of rubbish that they've sent 19,000 asylum seekers back. These are soft targets that people who are overstaying their visas. They're not sending back killers, rapists and drug dealers, because just like the Tories were stopped by the ECHR's misleading statements like this that make people lose trust in Labour. Scott in Dorset says, how long can Labour keep blaming the Conservatives? It's getting boring now. You've been here for 9 months. I think is it 8 months or 9 months? I think it's 8 months. And I'm worse off than I ever was under the Tories. Council tax up 5%, electricity up £200 a year, water up 25%. They actually believe the guff they're spouting, says Scott in Dorset. Matt is in Cheshire. It's 8 months apparently. Matt is in Cheshire. Matt, how do you think Labour has done over the last 8 months?
Good morning, Peter.
Morning.
Exactly how I imagined, probably just a little bit worse. As I've said to you numerous times, a lot of people in my area know the abilities of the people in this cabinet: Lucy Powell, Jonathan Reynolds, Angela Rayner.
Yeah, the thing about Lucy Powell is that she ran Ed Miliband's election campaign in 2015. That's always what I remember about her. I sort of think, is this someone I want running the country? I'm not sure.
Wow, I didn't know that, Peter.
Yeah. That's the kind of useless information that I have in my brain, Matt.
That's fantastic. No, I know that. It just justifies everything I know about her even more. What I would say is there's 1 million non-British citizens who are receiving benefits. And if we say minimum universal credit is, I think, £300 a week, times 52, times 1 million, that's £3.5 billion according to my bad maths. That's bound to be the very minimum of what the amount of money that we're paying out to
Matt, do you know what, Matt? It's not a great line. We're gonna try and get you back on a better line. I do want to hear what you have to say. Matt always has sensible things to say. We'll try and get him back on a better line. Nigel in London is on the line, though, too. Nigel, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme this morning.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I've got a number of things I'd like to say, and I'd like to start off by saying I don't care whether it's Labour or whether it's the Conservatives in power. None of them are keen on business growth or keen on the financial stability of the people who pay our taxes.
Labour says it wants growth, and that's the plan, and they're going to get a load of business growth. I'd love to see it, but it hasn't happened so far in the last 8 months anyway, Nigel.
Let me just give you some examples, if you allow me.
Go ahead, yeah.
I would remove the VAT on the home heating, electric and gas straight away. It's only 5%. I'd remove that. Mm-hmm. That would help people. I would cut fuel duty by about 50% because, of course, everything that's delivered by road costs you and me money, whether it's a supermarket, whether it's Amazon, whatever it may be. And let's not forget that the emergency services have to pay fuel duty. I would not allow health tourists to get free healthcare. Another thing, I would cut benefits for people arriving in the country to absolutely zero. unless, of course, they are genuine refugees. And I think what's also important is for me that I'm fortunate to have a home in the United States. I pay 15 cents a kilowatt hour for my electricity. Why am I paying so much for it here at 30 pence a kilowatt hour?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are lots of really good points there. I suppose a lot of what the government would argue is that a lot of that involves the tax take and involves the money that they need to run the country. And if you're going to take, for example, just take one of those things, if you're going to take money off home heating oil, for example, which I support, I don't think that should be taxed, actually, well, there's going to be less money centrally to run the public services that we need, like the NHS. That's what the government would say, Nigel.
Well, that's a good point, but then on the flip side of that, the NHS is apart from it's a business. Why doesn't the NHS learn how to run its business much better? And look at the way it procures items. Look at the way it spends its money instead of just writing out a cheque and paying whatever it wants to spend. And this is the problem with this country. If you look at the United States, look at DOGE, the Department of Government of Efficiency.
Efficiency, yeah, in America, yeah.
How they're making huge cuts, which are benefiting Americans.
Although some argue in America that actually they're cutting too far and too fast, and they're actually cutting services to people who need them.
Well, that's another debatable point. But I foresee that interest rates will be over 5% in about 6 months' time. And I hope not. And I foresee also that inflation will be over 3%. Let's not forget, was it 1999, 2000? No, 91, I think it was. That's right, when interest rates were 16%.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're absolutely. We can't go back to those times, Nigel. You make some really good points there, and thank you for them.
Thank you.
Matt is in Cheshire, and we've got him back on the line. Matt, you're cut off in your prime. What would you like to say?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No
Peter.
problem.
Yeah, I think there's 1 million non-British citizens receiving benefits. If we say at a minimum, universal credit is £75, £80 a week, so £300 a month times 12 times 1 million, that's £3.5 billion. If we add all that together with all the other bits and bats and the increase in everyday spending from every single person that turns up on our shores every day, we'll probably get to 20-odd billion, you know.
It's a heck of a lot of money, and there are a lot of people who are hardworking taxpayers who think, do you know what, why are we spending all this money? This doesn't seem to make any sense.
Well, one, why are we giving benefits to foreigners?
Yeah.
I know we're not in the EU anymore, so we shouldn't be giving people things they're not entitled to. I think the Labour and the Conservative Party just see Britain as like a charity section. It's quite obvious now that money is coming out of British people's pockets to pay.
Did you see the interview with Darren Jones, Matt, or listen to it?
I did see it, and I saw another one earlier this morning, like an identity. He's obviously doing the rounds.
Yeah, I know. They're talking to a lot of people today ahead of their spring statement. So the one thing I found quite interesting, and I wonder what you think, Matt, is at the end of the interview, I think it was the final question I asked him, was about borders, and I said, you know, Keir Starmer seems very interested in the integrity of Ukraine's border, but he doesn't seem that interested in the integrity of our borders here at home. And that's a point that a number of people have made to me, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable point. He seemed almost sort of, not annoyed necessarily, but he took a bit of umbrage with it, and I just think they perhaps don't see it in those terms. They say, oh, they're totally separate arguments. One's a foreign policy issue, one is an issue of home affairs. You can't put the two of them together. You're conflating the issues. And I think a lot of people here actually do see that. They see the £3 billion that's being sent to Ukraine every year, and Rachel Reeves said in the budget it would be this year and every year that it is needed. And at the same time, they see problems at home that just don't seem to be taking as much of a priority.
That's because Keir Starmer, before he was ever the leader of the Labour, well, basically until he was elected, was an open borders advocate, as were most members of this cabinet. They don't believe in borders. They don't believe in the sanctity of Britishness. They believe in a one world sort of government. And by destroying...
Do you think Labour don't believe in Britain? They don't believe in Britishness?
I think we all know what Keir Starmer said about Davos. We all know that he basically is a globalist. He's a European. He doesn't care about... He doesn't see Britishness the same way as British people see it. We want an identity. We want to keep our country as it has always been. And we don't want things to be changed dramatically in the space of 10 years. And both Labour and the Conservative are never, ever going to stop that happening.
Matt, really interesting thoughts as usual. Thank you very much. Matt's one of our regular callers and he always speaks a lot of sense. Very, very interesting to hear from him. Let's hear a couple of voice notes now before the break. Claire has been in touch and she thinks she has an idea why some of the cuts have been brought in.
Morning, Peter. So the country is in a mess. They've squeezed the British people and businesses till they squeak. They've turned on the pensioners, the farmers, now the disabled and out of work, and the civil service. What next? Maybe stop encouraging the migrants to come to our shores and paying out for their needs. No, that would be too draconian and totally callous. And after all, that's why these cuts have been brought in, isn't it?
Very interesting thoughts there, Claire. Thank you for them. Mark, next.
All these announcements by Labour and Rachel Reeves, I have no doubt that these are nothing more than a cynical ploy just to head off support for reform. They're hoping to scrape back a few wavering voters that are sick of the migrant hotels, sick of government waste, sick of all the spaffing spending that they're doing. They're hoping to scrape a few of those voters back before the local elections. But, you know, they were never going to smash the gangs. They're never going to smash the migrant hotels. They're never going to smash the government wasteful spending. They're not going to smash anything. It's all future pie in the sky. They've got no intention of doing anything. And they're just terrified of reform, basically. But they're stuck for ideas. They don't know what to do. That's my opinion.
Mark, thanks for your opinion. Very welcome. Stuart says, I would like Rachel Reeves to implement everything they promised they would do before the election, like no council tax rises, growth of 2.5% and all the things they lied about. Stuart says, I'd like to hear Rachel Reeves say she doesn't need to cut disability benefit or winter fuel allowance for pensioners or pick on farmers because they've woken and realised to stop funding and homing immigrants in hotels all over the country. Thanks to Marion County Down as well, who says, regarding the Heathrow boss going to bed, I think most big corporations and government bodies will have protocols that say leaders should take command in shifts and are rested in between, so this is likely part of the emergency planning. And Dave says, good morning, Peter. I would like to know why the government is ignoring clearly the most obvious and biggest way to save money, which is to stop housing, feeding, clothing and pampering the migrants. They are illegal, which makes them criminals. Why do they get so well taken care of at the expense of our own well-being? Well, plenty more to talk about, including the fact that this week it was the 5th anniversary of the COVID lockdowns. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the legacy of lockdown with Professor Angus Dalgleish, and we'll talk about the vaccine injured as well. Lynn was on earlier on from Glasgow. As promised, I will put some of her points to the Professor of Oncology at St George's University in London, Professor Angus Dalgleish. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including John, who says cutting the civil service is not all about the Whitehall blob. It's also the people who work in councils all over the country. I bet it's the small people that face the cuts and not the high-ranking mandarins. Shane in Manchester says, morning, Peter. I'd like to see bigger cuts of civil servants and public sector spending generally from Rachel Reeves and get back to government spending that's sustainable. Max in Warwickshire says, I'd like Rachel Reeves to show me where all the employers are that are going to employ all the broken, sick, disabled people she has chosen to throw on the rubbish heap. Shame on her, says Max. Tracy says, morning, Peter. We should stop paying for their appeals. Why should the British taxpayer pay to keep people we don't want in the country in the first place, says Tracy in Wakefield. Chris in Ottershaw, I'd like to hear the Chancellor say that we are going to frack for gas and give us cheaper energy and to export liquid gas instead of importing it and use some of the profits to create a national sovereign fund to eventually fund social care. Thank you for that. And actually, social care, big issue in regard to the NHS as well, how it is coping, how the legacy of lockdown as well 5 years ago now. And that's why we're talking to Professor Angus Dalgleish, who's Professor of Oncology at St George's University in London. Angus, thanks for joining us today. We heard, let me start actually with a specific question actually from Lynn, who was speaking to me about 20 minutes ago. She is in Glasgow and she has got spinal difficulties, she thinks, because of the vaccine. And the vaccine injured are clearly a group of people for whom COVID, the legacy, lives on a day-to-day basis. How big a problem is it, Angus?
Well, first of all, I just point out I've got an emeritus from I'm an emeritus professor there now, which means I'm still there, but I don't get paid.
Right. They often say that it's Latin, and E means you're out, and emeritus means you deserve it.
Yes. To answer your question, this is an enormous problem. It gives me the chance to highlight the total farce of the Hallett inquiry is something which is costing us. You've been talking before about the waste of money and all sorts of things taxpayers' money shouldn't be spent on. This Hallett inquiry is a total farce.
It seems to me, sorry to interrupt you, Angus, but it seems to me that the Hallett inquiry is not even asking the right questions. Forget about the conclusion. Exactly. It's not even asking the right questions.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to highlight was that the bit on the vaccine inquiry, the introduction by Hugo Keith was an absolute disgrace because it was the conclusion. And he basically said, we all know the vaccines have saved millions of lives and are all fantastic. And we're here today because a few people think they have been injured by the vaccine, although there is no evidence for it. There was 170,000 such people. I and many senior colleagues of different groups, such as HEART and the COVID Children's Advisory Vaccine Campaign, and many all submitted amazing, well-documented pieces of evidence that these vaccines have caused unbelievable harm, and it's all been ignored and pushed under the carpet. I firmly believe the vaccines have caused more death and disability than the COVID virus ever did, and yet still the NHS is pushing these vaccines to people like me. You get phone calls, texts saying you must come and have a booster. Now, any vaccine, I've done vaccine research for 35 years at least, and it's very obvious any vaccine needs a booster, doesn't work. And yet they fell for this because the antibodies fell down. I mean, just the basic thinking of this was just so childish. I mean, there was no proper science ever involved in this. So I have unbelievable sympathy for these people who've had dreadful side effects from the vaccines. I mean, it started with clots, strokes, heart attacks, a variety of things very early on. And I will give AstraZeneca credit that they basically, first of all, they did it on a cost plus basis, but they kept their side effect book open. And so it was easy to see that there was a problem, and they withdrew them. And the next thing we have is that there's tremendous autoimmune disease. I mean, there's so many diseases associated with the vaccine that it's very easy to say it's just coincidence. When in fact, my colleague Paul Marrick in the United States has been through the CDC data and showing that there's about 130 diseases associated with vaccine injury, the vast majority of which have an autoimmune character. Now, we predicted this when we found the virus initially, the sequences, that 80% of the spike protein has homology with human epitopes. So this autoimmunity was virtually guaranteed. We warned the government about this, and this was the highlight of stories in the Mail on Sunday last week, the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph. In fact, they all had pictures of the document submitted by Gwyddian Prince and Richard Dearlove actually trying to enforce the importance of our observation, which were ignored by Vallance, Whitty and Farrar, and they have to be held to account as to why they did that. I believe that all the people who've been damaged by the vaccines, and this also includes the case I've been making, is that it seems to interrupt the immune's control of cancer. And I have been really worried about this. Again, nobody is taking any notice. I'm told to shut up and that I'll just frighten people. No, I'm trying to stop people.
You're an emeritus professor of oncology. You're an eminent medical practitioner and researcher who is saying that, and even you are being ignored. And that worries me, Angus. And I wonder if we can move perhaps from the medical side to although the medical aspect is still very pertinent to this, but the legacy of lockdowns, both with physical health and mental health, is huge. Are we even beginning to realise the implications?
Well, that was the other thing. And, people, when I speak like this, I'm very annoyed. I'm just dreadfully annoyed that people like myself and many other senior people were not listened to. I said right at the very beginning that the lockdown would be a disaster just from the fact that as a cancer centre, we would not be able to screen, pick up and treat the cancer patients because we're becoming a national COVID service. And there was absolutely no need to do this. When the lockdown was introduced today, 5 years ago, March the 23rd, it was obvious that we were at the end of the first wave. We pointed out that there's absolutely nothing to be gained by this. I was one of the first senior clinicians to sign the Great Barrington Declaration with Jay Bhattacharya, who has been made now head of the National Institute of Health. So to have somebody who's got that clear vision and not Tony Fauci involved is something to have some hope for in the future. But it was obvious that lockdown was, one, not necessary, two, continued for far too long, and then it was introduced again when we already knew it didn't work. Why was there nobody sensible on stage? And I really mean that. I don't think there was anybody sensible on stage.
Let me ask you, Angus, just about welfare reform in this country, because the government wants to cut a huge amount of welfare, about £5 billion worth of welfare payments. But there are loads of people who are, many hundreds of thousands, who are claiming all sorts of benefits because of the mental health aspect of lockdown. I just wonder whether that is something that the country is getting to grips with, understands, or whether perhaps we've created a generation of people who often don't want to work or can't work or want to work from home. And also the implications for young children as well, because a year or 2 years of their life proportionately, of course, is far more than for adults, and their development is affected.
Yeah, lockdown was just such a stupid thing to do. I cannot list the number of areas which we pointed out there would be real big damage. First of all, it was mad with children and not letting them go to school, putting masks on them, putting masks on children. I mean, just right from day one, we said, the smallest hole in one of those masks is 3 times bigger than the biggest virus. So it is a complete ludicrous thing to do, and it's just purely to introduce a state of fear. What were they playing at? Now, Whitty and Vallance cannot deny that they did not know about the dangers of lockdown, because I and many others was screaming about it. So much so that the Daily Mail gave me a tremendous platform. I was writing nearly every week about the dangers of lockdown and the madness of the whole thing.
And
the lockdown was introduced when the first wave was disappearing. So, of course, it looked like it may have had a benefit. But I tell you, there was no benefit. And one of the things, the mental health of people who basically couldn't go out, especially young adults in poor households, I mean, it's left a devastating impact. The idea that you could work from home and do everything just as well and have your food delivered, what have you, has it inculcated a sort of dependency on the state that you don't need to work, it'll look after you. Well, we now see what's happening.
We're seeing the fruits of that. Angus, thank you. A lot of sense spoken and a good reminder actually of what happened 5 years ago when those lockdowns were implemented. Angus Dalgleish there, Emeritus Professor Angus Dalgleish, Professor of Oncology at St George's University in London. Greg's been in touch from Cheshire and he says since the COVID jab it has caused really bad tinnitus for which there is no treatment or cure. It has taken over my life. Nobody wants to know what I mention. Nobody wants to know when I mention this to doctors. They look at me as though they know this is not an isolated case. Another viewer says, great to hear Dalgleish on COVID and the vaccine. He's 100% right on everything. We're going to take more of your calls, texts and tweets. We're going to reflect on all those different arguments and debating points that have been made this morning on the economy. As well, we're asking the question, what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday at the Spring Statement? Lots of reaction to that coming up in just a minute here on Talk.
Did you burn yourself?
Just a little bit. Watch. Name
oh my God, I think my top's on fire.
Name a time, Samara.
2017.
2020 and 17 seconds. Let's have a look.
Oh,
the
look,
time there
it is.
It's 2020 and exactly 17 seconds.
That's amazing.
What just happened?
What just happened, indeed?
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Jason in the Lake District, who says, if only Angus and the Great Barrington Declaration would have been listened to. It's one of the biggest crimes of our history that they've got away with it. So many of them should be in prison, along with the majority of the media who pushed constantly for harder measures, says Jason. Well, we'll continue to reflect on that. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. And one of the great privileges of this job is speaking to you, is speaking to people who watch and listen to the programme. I like speaking to people like Angus, professors of oncology, and he has a great perspective and he speaks an awful lot of sense, and it was good to hear from him. But the thing I really like doing more than anything else in this job is speaking to people who ring in, they've got stories, they've got opinions, and that's the best bit. That's definitely the best bit. Although sometimes the stories we hear are quite difficult to listen to. Sometimes people tell us things that are very, very difficult. And Anna was in touch from Sussex yesterday, and we got quite a reaction to what Anna was saying. She was telling us about being in a relationship with quite a fundamentalist Muslim man and the family and the abuse that she suffered. We spoke briefly about it, but a number of people got in touch and said, actually, hold on a second, Peter, I want to hear more from Anna. So we've got her back on the line, and Anna's in Sussex. Anna, thanks for talking to me yesterday. I appreciate it. And maybe you could just tell me a little bit more about your situation. You're out of that relationship now. Things I know are a lot better. But just tell me about what it was like over 20 years ago when you were in that relationship.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm really sorry. I couldn't do the Zoom call, and part of that is because it would be such a safeguarding issue around myself.
I totally get that, Anna.
Children.
Anna, there's absolutely no need to apologise. There's no pressure to get your face on camera. That's absolutely fine. No problem at all.
Just to explain that, though, so obviously it's over 22 years ago now, I met who I thought was quite a moderate Muslim. I was Christian, and I thought the religions were quite in keeping with each other. It wasn't until I fell pregnant that I realised what I was actually getting into. So I started to attend the mosque and started to listen to the preachers. I was welcomed in by the women, invited to their homes, and when I started to hear what's said behind closed doors, I realised just what I was getting myself into, and it changed dramatically to wanting my daughters to go through FGM.
So they were advocating female genital mutilation of your daughters?
Yes.
Goodness
yes, they
me.
were. Having my boys circumcised in backstreet surgeries, which was a horrendous experience. But there, at the time, was no escape. I was watched, like I said, from the moment I left the house to the moment I returned. I wasn't allowed to go out unless I was driven somewhere, or I had to take a taxi, which a lot of the drivers were from the local mosque.
Yeah.
The mosque, one in particular that he frequented, was raided 3 times due to terrorism issues. I went to the weddings of 2 men that had been released from Guantanamo Bay, and I remember just how severe the teachings were back then.
What was said? What was advocated in those mosques that you were in?
So I know we are so liberal and so tolerant in this country, and we believe that we can live side by side. There is a superiority, and we are all infidels, even you. And as much as we say there are moderate Muslims and fundamentalists, the teachings are the same, the basics are the same, and they are going to go to heaven, and for in whichever way they need to, they will do what they feel is best, and all Muslims have to stand together. And certain things have happened in the UK. People have gone into hiding. They are usually in mosques. The communities will hide people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of illegal activity, and I am so scared because it was so prevalent and so bad 22 years ago. And I do believe that, especially with Keir Starmer and his stance after the riot, it will only exacerbate this belief that they are above the law. and can do what they want.
And when you look back on that period now, it was a while ago now, Anna, and even today, perfectly justifiably, not questioning your decision at all not to come on camera. I totally get that. Even now, there's clearly some element of threat in your life that you feel.
Yes. When we were together, there were constant threats that he would take the children, he'd take them to a Muslim country, I'd never see them again. When the relationship was finished, I had to change the children's names and leave the area. The communities are very vast. People go to lots of different mosques. I'm constantly in fear that someone will recognise us. And one of my biggest fears that I don't think is ever touched upon is the Sharia law issue that's going on in the UK at the moment, and how that would impact women like myself that have fled Muslim marriages or relationships, and especially when you no longer go to mosque yourself or your children don't. And I think it's something, I genuinely think the people in power, I don't know why, they don't understand what a threat it is to this country. And how bad it is for women like myself who try and escape it. And as soon as I can, I want to get out of this country and take my children, but I'm not in a position to do that. But I think I know certain women that have left already. A woman who had to escape with her children and move abroad because the threat from the community was so much. It is such a concern.
Okay. Anna, thanks for talking to us again today and giving us more information and context on that call yesterday. Thank you very much. That's Anna in Sussex there sharing her experience. Thanks everybody who's been in touch about the interview with Angus Dalgleish as well. Jane says, thank you for speaking to him. You could have had him on all day and only scratched the surface of the vaccine injured, how they've been ignored and not believed. Well, certainly I believe Lynn in Glasgow. She's clearly gone through absolute hell. And we had another person talking about tinnitus as well. William in Horley says, that was a great interview with Angus Dalgleish. I just wish people had listened to him. My friend had his first job 2 years ago. Soon after, he lost hearing in his left ear and has never come back. He now has to wear a hearing aid. Nobody seems accountable. It's just dreadful. The countries are such a mess now and people are messed up too. It is horrible. Brian says, get it right please. The poor do pay tax, VAT, council tax, fuel duty, alcohol duty, tobacco duty, car tax, vehicle, what's VED, vehicle excise duty, is that it? Insurance tax, inheritance tax, death duty, everybody pays tax, says Brian. Mark is in Glasgow and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Tell me what you think, Mark.
Hi, good morning. Well, I was listening earlier on about pensions and pension locks and so on, and did a little bit of research and found out that in most of Europe, pensions are 15 to 20,000 a year.
Yeah.
Ours has barely moved. I mean, people talk about percentages. Forget the percentages. It starts from a very low level. So the triple lock absolutely is there to keep people in some sort of safe position. But the truth of the matter is, next year we'll be paying income tax on basic pensions, which is a madness, and it's all because the level at which we start paying tax has barely moved.
This whole idea of fiscal drag, and there'll be a lot of people, I think, after Wednesday, not just pensioners, that will be brought into tax that weren't there already, Mark.
Yep. Well, that's the point. We're a low-income economy now. There's little point. I've been in business. I've got rid of my business, sold the assets, and so on during COVID and after COVID, because I really don't want to be sort of run by some socialist crew. And I think the Conservatives started that game off, this sort of global nonsense, where we all have to be equal and so on, except hundreds of thousands, if not millions, as we know, a year of immigrants coming in, most of them very low earners, so we're actually supporting them, and it overturns the idea of getting younger people in to help support the older people as they become pensioners. Not if you're having to support the younger people
as well,
paying them dividends as well, by paying sort of taxes or benefits as well. I think we're heading into the kind of recession I escaped the Midlands 40 years ago and came up to Scotland, where we'll end up with massive inflation, we'll end up with no business confidence. Labour talk a good story, but there's the old thing about talking the talk and walking the walk, and even under Blair, they could talk the talk, they could never walk the walk and make it happen.
Okay.
It was always sort of loads of taxes going on, all that PFI, public finance.
Okay, Mark, we're just going to have to leave it there, although we're going to crash the news, but I really appreciate your thoughts and thanks for having your say. If you want to join Mark on the air, 0344 499 1000, still reacting, and we'll play a couple of clips after the break, actually, of what Darren Jones and Mel Stride were saying a bit earlier on the programme. Stay with us here on Talk.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I hope you've been with us for the last couple of hours. It's been a really good show. Lots of really interesting guests, including Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. We've heard a lot from you as well. We're going to do that more as time goes on, and we're going to talk about the asylum crisis wrecking our communities. Home Office spending on asylum accommodation and support has shot up from $739 million in 2019-20 to $4.7 billion last year. We'll talk to Kevin Saunders about that. He's a former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. We'll talk more about Heathrow as well, how they're recovering. Simon Calder will be with us as well, and we'll take a load of your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes. Lots to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. If you want to get your voice on the air, give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note, less than a minute please, 0344 499 1000. Same number for if you want to send me a WhatsApp text message. Lots of people doing that. And of course, if you want to get your voice on the air as well with a live phone call, 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 1. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, there's a lot the government is saying today. It's talking about the spring statement. Keir Starmer's actually been on Twitter this morning saying my government it's not his government, it's the Queen's government, or the King's government. My government will make sure we have the workforce needed to get Britain building. Our plan for change will deliver 1.5 million homes and drive growth across the country. I think he has no chance of getting 1.5 million homes by the end of this Parliament, but we'll see. We also have lots of people reacting to what Rachel Reeves is saying. Jez says, if Reeves wants to cut the welfare budget, it's pretty simple. Stop spending 8 million a day and keeping illegal migrants in 4-star hotels, giving them phones, free driving lessons, etc., and not take money away from the old and the disabled. Well, it's interesting. Today, actually, there are calls from various councils sounding the alarm on the migrant crisis. Over 38,000 asylum seekers in hotels. Well, let's talk to Kevin Saunders, who is the former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. Kevin, these really a lot of local councils, as we come up to the local council elections, are seeing expensive hotel accommodation, the numbers rising as well. Why has the government not got a grip on this, Kevin?
Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon.
Because the government, despite the fact that everybody has been telling them that we don't need to put people into hotels, ignore us and put people in hotels. It is much better to put them onto bases like Westerfield and house them in that way. It is much better to have 2,000 people in one place than 2,000 people in 20 or 30 hotels scattered across a community.
It's as simple as that, you're saying. Why do you think the government is ignoring the advice from you and others?
Because the government listened to their MPs, and their MPs don't want them, and therefore it doesn't happen. It's that simple. It's politics. It's all politics.
It's astounding, actually. More than 28,000 people have reached the UK via small boats since Labour won the July election, and since the start of this year, 5,025 people arriving on small boats, 24% more than had reached the shores by the same time last year. We have the Immigration and Asylum Bill that is going through Parliament at the moment. The government thinks that's going to work. Will it?
No. And until the French come onto the Channel, and there has been some movement, the French are thinking about coming onto the Channel to stop the boats, then nothing will change. You can build reception centres anywhere you like and process people there. That won't stop people coming across the Channel. The only way to stop them coming across the Channel is by the French putting the Gendarmerie Maritime onto the Channel and actually physically stopping the boats.
The Home Office spending as well on asylum accommodation and support has gone from 739 million in the financial year 1920 to 4.7 billion in 23-24. Why is that rise so huge?
Because more and more people are coming, because the system doesn't work. While we accommodate asylum seekers in the way that we are, the budget will continue to rise, and it will go up and up and up. And the business about the local authorities, we're seeing the government trying to speed up asylum decisions, but once the asylum decision is made, that individual, if they're granted leave to remain, become the responsibility for the local authority. So the local authority then have to find accommodation for the person. So it's a never-ending circle.
Kevin, I just wonder if there is any end to this, and you've suggested a number of solutions, and Labour says they want to smash the gangs. Why is smashing the gangs something that you don't think will work? I mean, it would be nice to smash the gangs, but there's got to be a lot more that is done, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, smashing the gangs is a lovely headline, and yeah, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could smash the gangs? But what we're seeing, and the Europeans have had some success with smashing some of the gangs, but it's like the Hydra. You cut off one head and two more spring up. And this is what's going to happen. You will never be able to smash all the gangs. What you have to do, and the right way of doing this, is saying to the migrants, you don't want to come to the UK. And you don't want to come to the UK because this huge deterrent is awaiting you. If you come to the UK, this will happen. And Labour removed that when they removed Rwanda. Now, I know people will say Rwanda would never have worked.
But it's a reasonable question. Where is the deterrent?
There is no deterrent. There is no deterrent to people coming to the UK. Therefore, they will continue to come to the UK.
What about the Balkans plan? Will the Balkans plan work in terms of field asylum seekers being sent there? Is that something that might help, Kevin?
Well, it's an interesting idea, but you're not going to stop people coming across the channel, which is what you want to do. You don't want to send them on to the Balkans once they're here. You want to stop them coming here in the first place. And then we're only going to send those that have failed asylum. Well, at the present moment, there are some very interesting decisions being made by immigration courts why people can't be removed and sent back and therefore given asylum. One of them was because they didn't like chicken
nuggets. Yeah,
chicken nuggets.
And we've seen the Nigerian man, for example, who committed a crime, a horrible crime actually, and then was let out of prison, then married and had a couple of children who have disabilities and need a lot of extra care. And he's saying his family life means that he can't be sent back to Nigeria, even though he's committed a crime. And if they'd just done that when he left prison, or even before he left prison, or before he'd finished his sentence, I should say, well, actually, the problem wouldn't have been there. There are just so many delays in the system as well, Kevin, that are so frustrating to so many people.
Yes, you're right, it is. And the lawyers that are defending the migrants and people like the Nigerian gentleman are experts in what they're doing. They're very, very good, and they're winning every time because they're digging up obscure bits of legislation and putting it in front of the tribunals. On the other hand, you've got to look at the tribunals and think, how the hell did some of these people get a job as a immigration tribunal judge if they're going to pass down a chicken McNugget judgment?
Well,
because
indeed.
that is just ridiculous.
Thank you very much. That's Kevin Saunders there, former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer. Lots of people getting in touch about immigration today, including Terry in Leeds. Terry, you're very welcome to the programme. Terry's giving me a ring. You can do this too, 0344 499 1000. Terry, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Peter.
Hi there.
How are you?
Okay, thanks, yeah.
Good. I wanted to raise the point about they want to stop disability payments, which could save them up to $7 billion. They saved a couple of billion off heating allowance for old age pensioners, and yet it's costing them, I believe, somewhere in the region of $11 billion for migrants. It seems that the disabled people and the old people are paying for these people.
They're low-hanging fruit, I think. I mean, Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, was on a bit earlier on. He said, well, you know, there is the triple lock. The pension is going up by more than £400 in the next financial year.
Triple lock minus £300.
Well, indeed, yeah, of course. The one sort of cancels out the other, doesn't it? Do you think the system is fair in regards to that, Terry?
No, I don't. No. I mean, I do understand that they have to look at the welfare system. Everyone agrees on that, no matter what party. But it's how they go about it that counts. But I do think, I mean, like, you know, you've just been talking about the immigration system. I mean, the system is they come here, they get in a hotel and basically get paid for it. I mean, they come through 2, 3, 4 countries. I mean, nobody else puts them up in hotels.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. Terry,
in France, they're living on the beach.
Terry, thanks for your thoughts. That's Terry in Leeds there. There's quite a few different political people talking today as well. We heard, of course, from Darren Jones earlier on. We'll play maybe a little bit of that in a minute or two. But Ed Davey is speaking in Harrogate at the Lib Dem Spring Conference. He says that Trump is not a reliable ally. He's talked about Ukraine relations as well. He says we need to step up and do more on defence. That is Ed Davey, who is speaking. Do we have sound from that? We do not, sadly. We tragically cannot bring you Ed Davey. You'll just have to remember his dulcet tones. Farage has been on as well. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. He's talked about the National Education Union wanting to tell students not to vote Reform. This is a story today as well. He says their leader, Daniel Kabede, also says that the UK is a brutally racist state. Reform UK will go to war against the institutions that are poisoning the minds of our children. That's what Nigel Farage says as well. So lots of politics around today, but immigration is the big issue that a lot of people want to speak to. Let's take another call on it from Anthony in Leeds, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Anthony, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Yeah, okay, Peter, yes.
Yeah, all good.
I'd like to say about these immigrants who've been put in hotels, right? I don't understand why homeless people on the streets, how come they're not being put in hotels? What's the difference between them and homeless people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very fair point. There are a lot of people sleeping rough in this country. I used to do a bit of work on this, Anthony, and it's a huge issue.
Yeah, because in I live, this afternoon I'll be going for a walk down the river, and there's an homeless man, and he's sleeping on the riverbank in a tent. It's not right to me. That's not fair, because I think this, all the men who got killed in World War One, they come back now and see their great-grandchildren even on the streets, like him who sleeps on the riverbank. What would they say? What did they die for?
I think it's a very fair question, and Anthony, your local council, Anthony, has a statutory duty. It's something.
MP for me is an event.
Okay.
You don't see him, doesn't anything.
Okay.
Only time he comes round is for your votes.
Well, your local.
This afternoon down the river where I live in South Leeds.
Yeah.
And you sleep on riverbank.
Well, Anthony, just to say, Anthony, your local council has what's called a statutory duty. It has to investigate that and hopefully find some accommodation for that man. But what I would, Anthony, just hold on. Sorry, just 1 second, Anthony. What I would urge you to do, and I know you care about this guy and you want him to be sorted out. I would report that to your local council and say, look, you've got to do something about that. They have to reply to you within 10 days. I know about this stuff because I used to work in homelessness in the government previously, and if I were you, I'd send them an email or pick up the phone and give them a ring. They've got to get back to you within 10 days and let you know what has happened to that person. Do you think you might do that, Anthony?
But I'm saying is, in the future, I won't be here to say that. In the future, you'll see little children at 5 years old sleeping on the streets of this country.
Yeah.
We've got to be realistic. You cannot provide for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think you make a lot of very, very good points there, Anthony, and thank you very much for them. We'll take more of your calls, more points like Anthony's in just a minute here on Talk, so stay with us.
There's a reason that one of the very first things President Trump did after the inauguration, as opposed to Obama and Biden, was to put Winston Churchill's bust back into the Oval Office, because these are the men who understand that there are always those who are prepared to destroy our civilization, whether it's the Third Reich, whether it's global jihadism, or whether it's those inside our countries who, for some reason of guilt complex or self-hatred, are trying to dismantle our countries.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Keir Starmer has been on Twitter. He says the government will make sure we have the workforce needed to get Britain building. He's made a commitment to deliver 1.5 million homes by the end of the Parliament and drive growth across the country. They've announced a big plan to train a load of people to work in the construction industry, but of course that training takes time, and if you're going to build 1.5 million homes by the end of the Parliament, I think that's a very, very big ask. So, I mean, we're not building enough homes. We know that. It's a very, very big task. And actually, there's lots of tasks for the economy, and we're asking you, what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday at the Spring Statement? What is it that you want from her? 0344 499 1000. Well, earlier on, I spoke to her deputy, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. This is what he told me.
Well, we are committed to cutting waste and improving the productivity of our public services. That's why today we've announced the fact that the administrative budget, the back office costs of running these services will be coming down in the years ahead, and we'll announce more later in the week about how we're going to be investing up front to support that transformation of public services. But ultimately, we need to reduce the cost of the state and improve the outcomes that people get from public services. That's a big agenda of public service reform that we are very much up for, and that does include, to your question on quangos and arm's length bodies and all of these types of things, our commitment to reducing that number.
But you've increased it. You've increased it in the last 8 months.
We've set up some new ones in order to align with our priorities for this Parliament, but we've also closed some, and we're going to be closing more.
How many have you closed?
Because we do think that there are. I think we've closed 3 or 4.
Okay, so you've set up 27, but you've closed
NHS England.
Okay, NHS England, obviously massive quango. Absolutely take that point, but you've set up 27 and you've closed 3. I mean, there's a lot more to do, is there not?
There's some more to come, but of course the key thing here is how much does each of those quangos cost and how much can you save. So if we can make a huge amount of saving from closing NHS England, and that means you can pay for 2 or 3 smaller bodies that are important for delivering our priorities and still make a savings, then that's totally fine with me.
Well, that was Darren Jones there, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Mel Stride also spoke to me a bit earlier on. He is the Shadow Chancellor, Conservative, of course, former Work and Pensions Secretary, so I asked him a little bit about that as well. But this is what he had to say on the civil service.
So you're right, it went from 365,000 up to 515,000 today, a lot of it due to COVID. In fact, when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, in order to fund our commitments then to increasing the amount we would spend on defence, we made a commitment actually by what was then 2028 to save £2.9 billion in that year. What this government has come forward is to say that they will be looking to save £2 billion, so rather less than we were putting forward when we were back in government. But look, the whole idea of getting towards a smaller state is really important because we have huge challenges as a country, some of which are geopolitical. some of which are domestic, an increasingly ageing population that we have to support, and so on, and some of which are actually political for the Conservative Party in terms of appealing in particular to lower age groups. All of that needs a dramatically rewired economy, which is why Kemi Badenoch is absolutely right that we need to take the time to think through exactly how we're going to do that, because there are many strands to it, but one of them is absolutely getting the size of government under control and making sure that it's efficient.
Well, lots of people asking about the benefits bill as well, asking questions about migration, on what to ask Rachel Reeves. I just want to play a few voice notes and then we'll take a couple of calls. Norman and Ian are waiting. We'll speak to them in a second, but let's hear from Kelvin first.
Morning again, Peter. Question I would like to ask is, how come they're so quick to cut the benefits for the sick, the disabled, and rob all the pensioners, and yet all these migrants flooding in the country still keep all their benefits? Not one of them have had a benefit cut, have they? You know, they don't go after them. And I'd say that was the biggest bill, not the welfare bill. They've got all this hidden money that they don't tell you that what they get, like legal aid. You know, it's so disgusting. I couldn't get legal aid. I was sacked and I couldn't get legal aid for anything. You know, but along comes Dingy Johnny and his boat, and he can get everything he can. This country is bloody ridiculous. It's stupid. Anyway, that's my rant. Oh, and Rachel Reeves, I've already said it once. You know, it'd be great if she said she was resigning because she couldn't run a piggy bank. Anyway, bye.
Thanks, Kelvin. Judy wants to make her point as well on a voice note. Let's play this.
Hello, it's Judy from Altofts, West Yorkshire. I think we, the taxpayer, are fed up to the eye teeth of being taken for a ride by different people. One way you can stop this student loan malarkey is only if you were born in this country can you get a student loan. Only if you were born in this country you can get legal aid. Only if you were born in this country you can get benefits. That should sort it all out right away. Thank you.
Ian has been in touch as well about what he'd asked Rachel Reeves.
Morning, Peter. Hope you're well. Great show as normal. In answer to your question, what would I ask Rachel Reeves? I'd ask her if any of her party do they have any integrity? Because they're all disingenuous. Maybe we should encourage politicians to take lie detector tests in future, because they just lie through the teeth and you can't trust any of them at all, especially this lot in government. It's whatever they say, you know they're going to do the opposite and lie. So what's the point?
I think what Ian is saying there, I mean, I don't think all politicians lie all the time, but there are some, many perhaps, who do. And I think Ian's frustration there with the political class in this country just speaks volumes. I think there are so many people who feel the same way, who feel we're not being given a fair deal and we're not being told the truth. I wonder what Lynn thinks. Lynn has been in touch with a voice note on the interviews with Darren Jones and Mel Stride.
Another frustrating morning listening to your guests. As the previous lady said, they haven't got a clue. The thing that gets me is, A, you never challenged the Labour guy about all the rubbish he was spouting out, and B, why the Conservative guy didn't explain or reinstate that how the country was before they went out of power. Everything was coming down. Everything. We know that. But they never say a word.
Lynn, thanks for your thoughts there. I mean, I did challenge Darren Jones. I challenged him on a number of things. Can't challenge him on every single point, otherwise he never gets a word in edgeways. But I did listen to him, but I also challenged him on a number of points we saw in that clip a few minutes ago, me challenging him on the quangos and the fact that they're setting up more quangos, 27 of them so far in this Parliament, which I think is a wasteful thing. But thank you for your comment nonetheless. Ian is in London and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Ian, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello again, Peter.
Hi, Ian.
Right, what I'd like to say to you is there's two things on two of your guests today that really, really annoyed me. The first one was with that Darren, when he was so smug. His actual comment was to you, and it passed everybody by, was because of the majority that the Labour Party have got. So basically, they can do whatever they want over the next 4 years.
They were democratically elected, Ian. I mean, the point is a factual one. They've got 411
That's
MPs.
Right. But that's the smugness of it.
It's democracy as well, Ian. I might not like it, you might not like it, but they are the government.
That's right, but it's because, but basically they're the government, but are they doing exactly what they said in their manifesto? No.
No, they're definitely not. You're right about that.
Right, so basically they were voted in on a vote that actually, with all intents and purposes, the way that the Conservatives have been, that they got in voted because they, according to the public, they were the best of the worst lots. Right?
Okay.
The other one, was the guy from the that was talking about the universities. And
Nick Hillman, yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to Darren for 1 second.
Sure, of course, go ahead.
Well, when he talks about the pensioners, that the pensioners are looked after, the pensioners, a lot of them are looking after their grandchildren because the parents can't look after them because they've got to go out to work. Okay. Right? They never mention that. Some of them are now ill and frail. They can't go out to work to make up their money, where the youngsters possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? But he misses that. Mm-hmm. Right? So now go back to Neil.
Sure.
Right? Was it Neil?
Nick Hillman, yeah.
Yeah. Nick came out with something which I found really, really appalling. He said that people that go to university make better parents. Now, I know my parents never went to university.
I don't think he said that. Did he? I don't think he said that.
Yes, he did. He said that they better for family. You listen back and you'll hear.
I don't remember that, but okay, I'll take your word for it.
And that was damn right. And with the universities, as I've always known from something that I've worked in before, universities were always brought pushing students into university. No parents actually get the time to ask the tutors, is there going to be jobs at the end of it if they don't go? If they did like a plumbing course or an electrical course or anything else like that, they got more chances of getting a job.
Definitely. I had a plumber in my flat a few months ago. He was there for 7 minutes. He charged me 92 quid. You know, he doesn't have a university degree. He doesn't need one. He's got a great job.
Right. It's like with my girlfriend's son. He's got a master's degree in chemical engineering. And because he's got autism, he can't get a job.
No, they choose people with experience.
But how can you have experience if you've been to university for the last 4 years?
And get that qualification. My goodness. Well, Ian, thank you for your thoughts there. I'm not too sure. I don't think I heard. I'm looking at the team here. I don't think Nick talked about people going to university being better parents. That's certainly not my view by any stretch of the imagination. You don't need to have a university education to be a good parent. There are many, many parents, including my own, who didn't go to university at 18. Norman is in Dartford. Norman, I think you listened to a few different politicians this morning. What did you make of what they said?
Well, first of all, as an ex-cancer patient, I all through the epidemic, I listened to Mr. Dalgleish and Mr. Carol Sikora, and they predicted this right from the start, that you will kill people if you shut the NHS down. So they've stuck with that and they've been proved right. Now on to Rachel Reeves and this Darren Jones.
Yeah, that's right.
Darren Jones. They talk about getting the 18 to 24-year-olds back to work, but they do everything to hamper people employing other people.
Well, certainly a load of people, Norman, would agree with you in regard to the national insurance rises that are coming in a 7 days' time.
Yeah, but these are supposed to be intelligent people. With Rachel Reeves, she's upped the rate of employers' national insurance. Right? They've got this work.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you, Norman, but I totally agree with you, but she would say she needs to balance the books.
Well, she's not going to get people back to work if she makes it harder to employ people.
Well,
to be honest, that is absolutely ludicrous, Peter.
Well, it's a very fair point, Norman, and I think it's one that a lot of people agree with. Penny in Essex says, hi, Peter, the only time a politician is actually telling the truth is when they say another politician is lying. Terry in Slough says, I'm in my 70s, and in my opinion, this is the worst bunch of politicians, both Labour and Tories, that I've seen in my lifetime, and I've seen some terrible ones. Only reform can put the great back in Britain again, says Terry in Slough. Peter, you mentioned construction training. Here's some examples. Bricklayer apprenticeship, 2 years. Dry lining, 6 months. Electrical apprenticeship, 3 years. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to get get it by the end of the Parliament. You need to get moving very, very soon. How are you going to recruit all those people? How are you going to make sure that they start in when? September, and then another 3 years, and then you're going to build all the homes? 1.5 million homes? Don't think so. Don't think it's going to happen. Mike in York says the government put illegal immigrants into hotels rather than in one single location because they know that concentrating a huge number of unvetted, angry foreigners in one place represents a direct threat to our national security, says Mike in York. Another Mike says, my wife and I both had the vaccines. We weren't frightened of COVID, but desperately wanted to enjoy our retirement by holidaying in Spain during our depressing winters. Since the last forced vaccination, we both have tinnitus and permanent running noses. I've also lost my sense of smell since the last vaccine I had. We were so angry, we were virtually forced to have a vaccine we knew we didn't need. The NHS will chase us for boosters. Follow the money. Mike, another Mike, third Mike in York says, great show. I'm afraid I'm beginning to despise all our politicians. Where once I was an avid believer in the general honesty of most of our politicians, and now do not trust or believe anything they say. They are self-centred, narcissistic sociopaths, goodness me, who are unwilling to protect the integrity of this nation. If someone like me thinks this, then God help us, says Mike. Someone who's not called Mike is Brian. Great show, says Brian. The tax take is insufficient for our needs because the monthly money pot we all work with is insufficient. The bulk of money held by the rich is not being sent back, so our working pot is devoid of enough money to pay tax. We're going to take more calls between now and 1 o'clock. We're also going to speak to Simon Calder. The fallout from Heathrow continues. We'll get all of his thoughts, including on the Heathrow boss who went to bed. Should he have gone to bed? Maybe the deputy was perfectly in control. We'll find out in just a second from Simon Calder. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of people getting in touch. I've just been looking at my tweets there during the break, and let me just read out a couple of people who've been in touch on Twitter. Sandy says about the person who said that tinnitus started after their COVID vaccine. My husband has tinnitus. Hearing aids help him. Rotten Lass, I think Rotten in Swindon. Big fan of Rotten. Lived there for a few weeks. I'll never forgive Mel Stride for his abandonment of waspy women, says Rotten Lass. And Sue says the Conservatives left us with broken Britain after 14 years and Labour are just making it worse. The time is right for a change. Farage and Reform UK must be given the chance to show what they can do next time round. It can't be any worse. Cannot. Great programme, Peter, says Sue in West Sussex. Well, Sue, thank you. Sue sent in her message via WhatsApp. You can send me a WhatsApp same way you send it to anybody else, so 344 499 1000. We'll get to a couple of voice notes in a minute, but I want to talk to David in Gloucester first, who's given me a ring the traditional way on the phone, 0344 499 1000. David, I think the economy is what you want to talk about, and Labour. What are your thoughts?
Well, they're just fiddling around the edges, Peter, is the honest truth of it. You know,
I mean, 5 billion quid of welfare cuts. That's not fiddling around the edges, is it, David?
Well, it is in real terms. I mean, they're predicting it's going to go up 27 billion in the next 10 years or so. You know, 5 billion.
It's a fair point.
You know, there's 20 billion pounds being spent on immigrants every year. 3 billion going to the Ukraine. 12 billion, well, we don't know what the figure is for the Chagos Islands. How much are they giving away? Angela Rayner was last week in Ethiopia. Well, how much money was she signing off? It's just ridiculous. They've gone around the world giving money away to everybody else.
Well, in fairness, they would say, you know, you talk about Angela Rayner being in various Africa, I think she's in 2 or 3 different African countries. I mean, they have cut foreign aid quite substantially. They've taken billions off that as well, David.
But they're not really spending the money where it should be spent. I mean, we should be looking after our own. We should be after defence. You know, I mean, again, we talk about defence. Oh, they're going to up it by 2.5%. Well, when? Oh, 2028, 2029. Well, that's 4 years away. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Well, it'll be over the course of the next while. But what do you want to hear from Rachel Reeves on Wednesday? What do you think our priority should be, George?
George, David, you mean?
Sorry?
Oh, you said George.
Is that not your name? No, sorry, David. David, apologies. George is the next person. Apologies, I got mixed up there. Apologies, David.
Yeah, no worries. No, it's just I want to see her actually spending the money in the UK and stop blooming, just keep picking on everybody. I mean, my bills have all... I mean, they talk about the economy. I mean, give you a close example, was that they borrowed a record amount of money in February. What happens on the 31st of January? They should have had an absolute bumper pay packet, but they didn't, did they?
Yeah.
They have spent, I mean, that is, everybody knows that self-assessment payday is the 31st of January. So why are they borrowing money in February at all?
Yeah.
They are in an absolute mess. The economy now has shrunk, what was it, 3 months out of 4? They only had a bit of a blip up in January or December, wasn't it, because of Christmas. Yeah. All the other months have been down, 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 and I'll guarantee they'll keep going down.
Well, we'll see what Rachel Reeves says on Wednesday, David. Apologies for mixing you up there with George. Both your names were on my screen. George is in Dundee, and it's definitely not called David. He's definitely called George. George in Dundee, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking the call. The question to Rachel Reeves I'd like to ask her, it's a multiple choice question. When these disability cuts come in, should me and my wife just accept sliding into abject poverty? Should I B, give up my caring responsibilities, because there'll be no carers allowance, there'll be no disability money, and try and find a job and leave my wife to potentially injure herself severely or even die through her illness? Or C, should I just book a plane now to Switzerland and finish it? I am sick of these immoral people that are inflicting this on us and giving billions of pounds away.
George, what does your wife suffer with?
She suffers from severe epilepsy.
Mm-hmm. And you need to be with her a lot of the time.
I'm very rarely more than 20 feet from her.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to deal with, George, and it mustn't be. It mustn't be a.
Peter. What I'll also add is probably since COVID, governments and politicians have made me less of a human being. They've made me cynical to the point where there's absolutely no return with these people now. My contempt for them is off the scale.
What would you like Rachel Reeves to do on Wednesday?
Say, I apologise to everybody that's got a disability in this country, and we are going to look at it again, and we are going to put British people first.
Okay. George, very powerful, very simple message there, a very powerful one as well. George in Dundee there, thank you for that. This person's been in touch, Jedi Master, I'm not sure that's your real name. You mentioned council tax rising, which they have, even though the Prime Minister Starmer said not a penny increase. However, I've just got my water bill, it's gone up 61%. That's the water companies rather than your local authority. But yeah, look, a lot of bills going up, definitely. Nicola says, why are the cuts in the civil service not happening for 4 years? If a private company can't make a profit, it goes bust and has to close. They should implement early retirement for those that want it and only give pay rises based on positive outcomes. Simon says we could stop the boats and all the costs of illegal migrants if we had a Prime Minister with balls to put the Royal Navy in the English Channel and physically stop the boats and spend the money saved on people in this country, just for a change. Mark in Selby says, how long does the illegal immigration crisis have to go on before it becomes an illegal immigrant acceptance policy? This fiasco has gone on for over a decade, for heaven's sake. What is the end game for our leaders and Islamic Britain, perhaps? Someone else actually on Twitter saying that Anna's call shows how naive I am personally about Islamisation of this country. I don't think I'm naive at all. I think I just have a slightly different view to some people. Kenny in Edinburgh says, if methane was expensive, the government would tax our backsides. Brilliant. Gary says, Darren Jones criticised the Conservatives for having 2 or 3 budgets a year. Can I point out to him that Labour's about to have its second one in just 5 months? And on Darren Jones as well, Lorraine says, the first words Darren Jones uttered were that he created economic stability. Once again, it is impossible for this Labour government not to lie. Jones is either deliberately lying or he, like Rachel from accounts, is financially inept. The arrogance he exudes is testimony to how Labour views the majority of the electorate. Calling the Conservatives that lot just highlights such poor standards. Let's hear from Karen, who has sent me a voice note, nice and short one, about what she would ask Rachel Reeves.
Hi Peter, I'll tell you what I want to hear from Rachel Reeves, that they're not going to support the migrant hotels anymore and they're not going to keep taxing the British people to pay for it. That's what I want to hear.
Ledge has been in touch as well. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the name. Ledge, this is what they say.
Hi Peter, Pete from Bath here. Let me give you the savings that Labour have saved me, a working person. Council tax, up. Electric bill, up. Gas bill, up. Water bill, up. As you can see, I'm not saving money. I never will under this government. We got to get them out. Don't know how we're going to do it, but we can't carry on like this. Great show as always, though, Pete. Have a good day.
Thank you. Tristan also in touch on his views on Labour.
I did think the Conservatives were pretty bad considering what they did in the past 14 years. But Labour have topped the cake. They really have. They're deplorable. They're a disgrace. And to be honest with you, they're nothing but pathological liars. The amount of things that they said they'll do in their manifesto, they've done none of them. They're nothing but absolute liars. And they're destroying this country and they're hollowing it out. And it's just a disgrace. I absolutely hate this government. I literally hate them. I'm disgusted with them.
Thank you as well to Gary. He says Darren Jones seems to think it would be okay. It seems to think the economy is doing okay. You should have asked him if the Conservatives had won another term in July and the economy had performed the way it has over the last 8 months. Would he still be saying that the economy is in good shape? Stuart says the public sector needs to lose at least 20% to get back to the level pre-COVID. Then more can be cut with efficiency and AI. That is kind of the government's idea. It says about 15%. Dave says, I am 70 years old. The so-called uplift in my pension this year has just been wiped out by my local council. They've just put council tax up by £400 a year. Labour just keeps on lying. Not a penny more in council tax, Starmer promised, yet they think we'll vote for them. Again, think on, says Dave. Should be said on that council tax promise from Keir Starmer, not that it's my role to defend him, but he had talked about the financial year 23-24, not this financial year, when he talked about not a penny on income tax. Ed Davey has been talking this afternoon, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He is talking in his view about Trump selling out the security of Europe and the UK. He says that Nigel Farage would turn our country into a Donald Trump tribute act. He's hit out at comments that Kemi Badenoch has made about the church roof. She had said that the Lib Dems were a party who want to be nice but have foolish ideas. This is something she said, a typical Lib Dem is someone that people in the community like and think, oh, he fixed the church roof, you should be a member of Parliament. Kemi Badenoch said they want to be nice, then they get there, they actually have got loads of very silly and foolish ideas, along with being able to fundraise for a local community. He says, Ed Davey as well says the Tories have abandoned our communities. Certainly quite a number of people getting in touch on lockdown as well, on the views of Professor Angus Dalgleish. Just one more voice note before the break. Jackie in Oldham on the legacy of lockdown.
I'll never forgive this government for lockdowns. It was the greatest attack on our civil liberties in the history of this country. I'll never forgive them for terrorising millions and millions of people with their advertising campaigns all about protecting an institution. I'll never forgive them for the fact that my 41-year-old sister, who protected the NHS and didn't contact them, died alone in a flat. That's the legacy of lockdown.
Goodness me, a very powerful voice note there from Jackie in Oldham. Thank you for that. I'm so sorry to hear about your sister as well. And so many people made heartbreaking decisions, and often the government ignored them. Often we know that there were many people high up in the government who ignored the advice and the laws that they put in as well. It is just something that was, in many ways, a very shameful episode for our country. I know people feel very, very strongly about it, and I do too. There's lots more to talk about. We're going to talk about Heathrow. We're going to get your opinions as well on Rachel Reeves. There's about 10 minutes to go before 1 o'clock and plenty more to discuss, so stay with us here on Talk.
It's up to the Brits. We've got MAGA, we've got America First here. You had Brexit in the UK. We're seeing this across Europe, where, whether it's Prime Minister Maloney or whether it's Modi on the Indian subcontinent. People are starting to say enough is enough. We would like to have our countries back. Borders matter. Sovereignty matters.
Absolutely. How come they aren't doing that? They're trashing our heroes. They took all their pictures out and put the head of communist parties in and pictures of themselves in.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's go to Simon Calder now. He is, of course, the travel correspondent of The Independent. There's so many different travel issues, particularly in regard to Heathrow getting back on its feet. Simon has just got off a plane in Bergerac. And Simon, let's grasp the nettles on this one. Tell us what's going on with Heathrow. We can't hear Simon Calder, but we will hear him very soon, hopefully. I'll read a couple of texts here. Margaret is in Edinburgh and says, if I hear another Labour politician talk as if pensioners are better off with the triple lock, I think I'll scream. It's a cost of living rise. After this April, I will be worse off as a pensioner. I will receive approximately £7 extra per week. I have a small private pension. The increase has pulled me into tax payments as the inland revenue adds your state pension into any private pension. So I've gained nothing with everything else going up. Margaret's not happy. Lots of people at Heathrow certainly not happy over the last 48 hours. Are things back to normal? Simon Calder, Simon's with us now.
Yeah, and by the way, my engineering issue, nothing to do with the excellent people at Talk.
Were you on mute, Simon? Were you on mute?
Let's not discuss that. There's many more important things to discuss, okay? So let's talk about what's happening at Heathrow. What you would have heard, if you were any good at lip reading, you would have known that I had just said, look, if you believe Heathrow, everything is back to normal. That's kind of the message they've been putting out all weekend, although we've got 9 inbound long-haul cancellations, Virgin Atlantic from Johannesburg, British Airways from places like Cape Town, from New York, all of them extremely high revenue routes, and those have just been cancelled. That's not particularly normal, but the great thing is that departures are getting away. Some delays which are going to hold people up by maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, but definitely better things were. And actually Heathrow says yesterday we handled 250,000 people, which is actually going to be one of the busiest days I think in their history. That's because although there were still 100 cancellations, what they did was basically fill every possible seat on every plane, or at least the airlines did, because they frankly have lost enough money already. They are so furious. They basically don't care how Heathrow and the power suppliers carve it up. They just want to they want a resilient operation, because when something like this happens, it's not the airline's fault, but they have full responsibility for those 250,000 passengers who didn't get where they need to be. And also the bean counters will be looking at the revenue they lost. I think we are looking at losses totaling about £100 million, and a large part of that from British Airways.
And speaking of that resilience, Simon, I just wonder whether there is the controversy that's there about the chief executive of Heathrow going to bed and leaving it to his deputy. I mean, some might argue that actually he needed to be rested for the stuff that's happening in future, and there are these protocols and so on. Was he right, do you think, to go to bed when they knew that this fire had happened and that Heathrow was going to be severely affected?
Well, as a simple yes/no question, yes, he was, because, I mean, I talked to him yesterday. He said it was simply not safe to operate Heathrow, and therefore it was actually a quite straightforward decision to close the thing and to tell everybody you're not going to be landing here. And the idea is being put about by Heathrow that, look, if you've got teams, you've got to have somebody, in this case the chief operating officer, who's kind of doing the night shift, and then we will get our top man, the chief executive, Thomas Walby, back on for the day shift. I mean, I talked to him yesterday. He said it's been a really tough 36 hours. So, I mean, I don't suppose he's been putting his feet up. He would have not spent any time on the golf course. But it's a really bad look. If you are, as it seems to be, if you're seeing Sean Doyle of British Airways, if you're seeing Shai Weiss of Virgin Atlantic working through the night, then you kind of think, okay, you're the top man. You've got to be seen to be on the case. But ultimately, they've made the decision. They said, and here's the crucial thing. Right, here's what he told me. Any big airport has thousands of systems: baggage systems, fuel systems, safety systems, ventilation, fire systems. They all have to be retested after the power goes off. They all have to be seen to be running before you can legally open. We are highly regulated. We cannot operate if it is not safe. As soon as we felt that we were safe, then we started having some flights. But it's almost as though kind of customer service, the image of the UK is really quite farther down the pecking order. Obviously, you've got to be safe. UK aviation, absolutely the safest in the world alongside Ireland. But ultimately, people were put into some really, really distressing situations. There's still people stranded thousands of miles away, and this was something which I've not seen at another airport. But I'm thinking, Peter, maybe you give me some business advice on this. I'm going to get some Travel Chaos T-shirts. Start a line of those. So yeah, I was stranded at Shannon in March 2025. I was 24 hours in Gatwick in 2023 for the August bank holiday meltdown of the NATS online air traffic control computer. They're pretty embarrassing.
Yes.
Every time it happens, UK PLC looks slightly worse. British Airways is furious because a large part of its business depends on people who want to go from Athens to Atlanta, thinking, oh, should I go through London, Amsterdam, Paris, or Frankfurt? I'll go through London, except they might be a bit less likely to now.
Simon, thank you. That's Simon Calder there. He's travel correspondent of The Independent. There was a great tweet about Simon yesterday. I saw it on Twitter where it said, if Simon Calder on your TV you see, on your flight you will not be. Which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Thank you to the top team behind the glass who have made the programme today. Chris Jacobs has been the producer. Shalape how do you pronounce her surname? Come on, Shalape, how do you pronounce your surname? Shalape Alatashe, I'll get it right someday, apologies, has been the assistant producer. Dave Rhodes has been the technical operator. Tech Up Dave, of course. Titus D'Souza and Faith Eden, the visual producers.